We're going to continue on with our discussions on Wednesday nights about race and injustice. And tonight we have two really special guests. We have invited both from the Syracuse Church, upstate New York, Dr. Jamila Mishner. She is a PhD professor at Cornell University. She is an expert in poverty, race, and social policy. And above all, she is a Christian, which she is highly sought after. And to speak on such topics, she can bring her expertise as well as her spirituality. Also with her is her husband, Justin. I'm going to actually pin them to the front so we can all see them. And I'm going to go ahead and let you take over, because what we're going to do is we're going to give Jamila and Justin the remainder of the time all the way till 8:30. And then we are going to have a time of Q&A at the end for just a few minutes, whatever their time will allow, probably about 20 minutes. So at 8:30 we'll officially end. If you have to go, you got to go. That's fine. But if you want to stick around for a Q&A, if you have questions, you can write them down. And what we'll do is we'll just let you virtually raise your hand at the end if you have a question, and we can have Jamila or Justin. Oh, there you are. I found you. Yes.
Yay!
All right. Again, thank you. We are recording this. We're so grateful that you guys are joining us from up in Ithaca, right? That's where you live. Yes. So welcome to Brooklyn, and I will mute myself and have you take over. Thank you.
All right.
You can go ahead.
Yeah.
Lead off.
Thank you so much, Phil, for having us. And wow, what a powerful story from that brother David to kind of lead off with. And it just makes the importance of the topic come into really sharp relief. And I think, many of us know that this is real. But just hearing about those experiences and how harrowing they are just makes it feel that much more real. And it just points to how much we have to work on, as a country and as a society. But that for many of us really begins here with ourselves and in this fellowship. So I just want to start by telling you a little bit about myself, and then Justin and I are gonna both share, in many ways when it comes to kind of the personal aspect of navigating race. We've been on a journey together, and we've both had to kind of learn and grow through that journey. So when I thought about what I wanted to share tonight, I said, what about you join me? And he was kind of like, hey, you got roped into this, not me. But luckily I was able to rope him in along with me. So, I actually grew up in New York City. I lived in Brooklyn until I was 8, and then we moved to Queens, and I grew up in Queens after that. So, and my family, my brothers, my nieces, my nephews, my cousins are there. They're in Brooklyn and in Queens. So I'm sort of the lone person who wandered upstate, but my roots are in the city, in Queens and Brooklyn. And my parents are immigrants from the Caribbean. My father's from Trinidad, and my mom is from Antigua. And my parents came here in the 70s, just hoping to find, the 1970s, hoping to find a better life. And, met each other here and started their family here. I have 3 older brothers, so my brothers were all born first, and then me. Growing up, I didn't think about race I don't remember thinking about race that much, let's say that. In part, that was because my parents were immigrants, and their orientation to race was very different, at least up until the point that they got to this country. And so for my mother, for example, the focus was much more about colorism, how light or dark skin you are, than it was about race. And so it's not as though we didn't talk about skin color, but we didn't have a lot of family discussions about race. And the first kind of real memory I have that had something to do with race was the election of David Dinkins. And I remember when he got elected, the first, Black mayor of New York City, my parents were really happy, and they were just like clapping and running around the house. And I remember my father saying, you know, a Black man is going to be mayor of New York City. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, like I was happy because they were happy, because when you're 8 or 9, like you're happy because your parents are happy. And it's funny that I grew up and ended up being like a social scientist and a political scientist who focuses on some of those issues. I always wonder if some of those seeds were planted then, but you know, that was my first real memory. You know, I talked about this in something that I shared Sunday night, that my mom actually shared with me as an adult. She shared with me a letter that I had written to Mayor Dinkins when I was in 3rd grade. And in the letter, I basically, you know, introduced myself. And I said something like, many people hate me because I am Black. And when my mom showed me that letter as an adult, I was kind of blown away, because I guess as an adult, I didn't remember that that's how I felt when I was a child. And looking back at sort of that feeling that I had, even at a very young age, I was sort of astonished that at that age, I was able to put my finger on it that way. But, you know, even though I didn't really have like the language or the framework for being able to make sense of the role that race was playing in my life as a child, there are really distinct moments where I remember it emerging. You know, I remember my father getting pulled over by the police once, and we were actually in Brooklyn. We were coming back from my grandmother's house, and my grandmother lived in East New York. And I remember the police officer pulling us over, and my father saying, you know, everybody keep your hands visible and just be, you know, be quiet and be still, and everything will be fine, because we, you know, nobody was doing anything wrong. And I remember my father sort of answering the police officer's questions calmly with his hands on the steering wheel, and then just more and more and more questions. And eventually he got my father out of the car, and my father had his hands up on the top of the car and he was patting him down. And we were just kind of like, what's going on? Like, we weren't doing anything. Why is this happening? And I remember there was an old Black lady who was like standing on the sidewalk. She was just standing there looking. And the police kind of motioned for her to move along. And she said, no, I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to make sure that nothing happens to this man, because he isn't doing anything. And eventually they let us go. But that fear like really stayed with me for a long time. And I was the kind of kid that would look around and just wonder why things were the way they were. I remember my aunt, who is a nurse, lived in New Jersey. She moved to New Jersey at one point. She lived in Brooklyn for a long time. But then when I was maybe 11 or 12, she moved to New Jersey. And we would go and visit her in New Jersey. And it was just this calm, beautiful, quiet neighborhood. It seemed really serene. And I would look around and think, wow, everybody here is white. So this is how the white people live. And this is how we live. And I remember having a lot of questions, but I didn't know how to ask them. And so when I went to college, I remember early on in college just really wanting to dig in. Like, I took a lot of classes on race and a lot of classes on poverty. And at the time, I just thought, I want to learn about these things. And looking back on it now, I could see it was really my desire to make sense of how I had grown up, and the places that I had lived and been. And that interest ended up really blossoming and structuring my whole future trajectory. And when I was after my freshman year of college, I over the summer, I came home to Queens over the summer, and my brother had become a Christian, and I ended up studying the Bible with some disciples in Queens, and I became a disciple. So that was about 20 years ago now. And I had already had a real interest and passion in race and racial inequality at that point. I don't remember it ever coming up. Like, it wasn't something I really talked to disciples about. Even when I went back to campus and I was like being a disciple on campus, and, you know, that was back in the day. So it was like, share your faith with 100 people every day. Like, who did you share with? Who are you studying with? And I just remember that being like, it was what my life was all about. But then there was this other part of my life where I was really immersed in thinking about and learning about racial inequality and racism and the history of race. And I even remember taking this class called the History of Whiteness when I was like a junior in college. And it was one of the first times I'd ever had a Black person who was like teaching me in any capacity. It was a Black woman who taught the class, Nell Irving Painter. And it was really fascinating. And I remember talking to a disciple once, just casually at Midweek. It was like, oh, what classes are you taking? And I was like, oh, I'm taking Econ 201 and blah, 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 blah. Oh, and History of Whiteness. And I just remember the look like, what's that? Like, why would you be taking that? And it was a very clear, like the rare times that I mentioned race to disciples, especially disciples that weren't Black, it was like really clear to me, this isn't really something I can talk to disciples about, like not white disciples. Like it's something I'm interested in, I'm focused on. And even as I decided to go to graduate school and get my PhD, I knew it was what I was going to be studying and doing research on. And, but I've always been like very measured about who I talk to about it, because I sensed that there was just a lack of knowledge, and also at times a lack of willingness. And so I want to let Justin speak, but I guess I'll say this, like one of the things that consistently stood out to me, even as I learned more and more about race, both my own life experiences, you know, going through graduate school, living in Chicago, you know, in neighborhoods that were deeply, deeply segregated. And by the time I moved to Chicago, Justin and I were married. So we were this interracial couple living in like predominantly Black neighborhoods in Chicago. And there were just so many experiences I had along the way. And I mostly processed those on my own, like separately. And with God, of course, I was always praying and trying to think about them spiritually. But I very infrequently went to disciples, save a handful of people I was very close to, because my sense was that the experiential gap between me and the average white Christian was huge, right? And that wasn't in my imagination. If we look at just the data, the research, when you ask white people and Black people about how they think their views of how white people are treated, or of how Black people are treated, there are these huge gaps, right? So when you say, do you think Black people are treated less fairly in dealing with the police? 84% of Black people are saying yes, but 63% of white people are saying yes. When you ask if you think Black people are treated less fairly in the criminal legal system, the criminal justice system, 87% of Black people are saying yes, whereas 61% of white people are saying yes. If you ask about employment, like hiring and promotions, 82% of Black people will say, yes, we're treated unfairly. Only 44% of white people. For mortgages and loans, 74% of Black people say, yes, we're treated unfairly. Only 38% of white people. And we can go through every area, in stores and restaurants, in voting and elections, when seeking medical care. And those gaps are huge. And I will say, as a social scientist, like the social science research shows that like what Black people are sensing and experiencing is actually more accurate, right? So there's lots of evidence of discrimination in all of these different areas. But if you just ask people about their perceptions, there are these huge perceptual gaps, which is why when I'm talking about something to somebody who's white, they really truly don't understand, right? It's not manifesting in their own lives and experiences. They haven't necessarily learned about it anywhere else. And so it's sort of like, what? Why are we talking about that? And that gap in experience and in understanding for a long time sort of prevented me, or was a hindrance in terms of the depth of my relationship with white disciples. And God has helped me to overcome that over the years. But I will say there were times where it made me feel like it was truly difficult to think about my brothers and sisters in Christ as family, right? And it was a gap that it takes a lot of work to overcome. So I'm gonna let Justin talk for a little bit and then I'll be back, but we're gonna kind of dig into that some more.
Yeah, we're gonna approach this as a team effort here. That's how everything goes better with us, when it's team. She's all the brains. I fix stuff. I don't really have the best intellect, so I'm gonna make up for it with saying things that hopefully make sense. So I've been a disciple for 18 years, it'll be 19 in October. I'm doing my math right. Great. Okay, we're off on a good foot. So I think what's important for me to kind of talk about in my experience is how I was raised, what I've experienced as a disciple, and then what I've learned being in an interracial marriage, and I have Black kids. So I'm gonna walk through all that, because I think sometimes we don't get the a real perspective of what it's like to be white as a disciple, and also acknowledge the parts of you, inner you, that you struggle with. So I'm going to share that with all of you, the parts of my inner me that I struggle with. And hopefully this won't turn into an episode of When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong. We're going to try to keep it real and it go right. So first off, here's a disclaimer is, what I'm going to share is my perspective for myself, is my experience as a white male disciple. Some things may ring true for a lot of other white disciples, but I can't say that you can say, well, since Justin said this, this must be the way all white males think or all white disciples think. In no way is that the case. I do urge white disciples, though, who hear this, to think about their upbringing more carefully and the perceptions and their preconceived ideas and how they bring that into the church. Because I know I would have missed almost all of this had I not literally become physical family with Black people, with my wife who's Black, right? I would have missed almost everything that I know today. Okay, so as a kid, I grew up definitely in a racist household. Now, does that mean my grandfather wore a KKK hood and lit crosses on fire in somebody's yard? No, right? But it was all these undertones, okay? None of my parents, my grandparents didn't tell me to hate Black people. There was nothing that direct. But what there was a very strong sense of there's something wrong with those people, right? Like, you lock your doors when you go in a city, those people don't know how to take care of anything. They're violent. They're not as well educated. They're not capable of being educated. They're not as smart. There was a lot of that. So my grandparents, both one on my mother's side, by the way, like, most of my family is dead, so it doesn't matter if I explain this stuff because they're gone. On my mother's side, both of her parents, her mother grew up in Camden, New Jersey, and my grandfather outside or inside of Philadelphia, I believe. They both explained to me as a very young child, below the age of 5, that Black people destroyed the cities. Like, that was how I grew up thinking about Black people, that Black people moved in, destroyed everything, so the white people had to leave. I mean, obviously now, in light of like actual history and what took place, like, there's a lot of economics that happened and structure, and white people left because they followed the money out of the city and left Black people with nothing. But that's not what I grew up hearing. I grew up hearing that it was Black people to blame for cities falling apart, not white people depriving and depleting economic resources, right? So I grew up hearing this. I grew up hearing the N-word. I grew up hearing jokes about Black people. That was common, not just in my family, but with my neighbors. I myself grew up with a flippant attitude towards saying the N-word, right? I didn't say it derogatorily towards any one individual, and I wasn't told to dislike any one individual Black person. My mother, even for a while, ran a little in-house daycare, and she had little Black kids she would watch during the day. She had your typical Black friends. She was the typical suburban white woman with Black friends, okay? So fast forward, this is my upbringing. Lower middle class white neighborhood, built for white people that excluded Black people purposively. And that was the white world I grew up in. So that all kind of comes to a head at the point where I become a disciple. I get involved in the church, study the Bible, all this stuff. Lo and behold, Jamil and I start dating, okay? Which was somewhat okay until Jamil and I got engaged. That's when, I'll never forget the day, my mother brought me a picture of our family, her side of the family, and said, "Do you see this?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You're going to ruin it." And up until that moment, I had no idea how deeply racist my mother was. to this very day, I have zero relationship with my mother over the issue of race. She's never met my kids. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. She's never met them, never spoken to them. Each time I called her to let them know that one of them was going to be born, she burst out into tears and hung up the phone. That's the relationship I have with my mother at this point. I don't have any other living relatives other than my brother, who also is a disciple. And I think God was doing something special there for my mother to work on her heart. And he also married a Black woman, and he lives in Detroit. So my mother, like I said, typical white suburban woman, had Black friends, completely devastated when her sons married Black women. Neither me or my brother talked to my mother because that's her choice. And she hasn't met any of her 3 grandchildren, not my kids or my brothers. So that's where it's an interesting thing, right? Like you can grow up as a white kid, feeling that Black people are separate, something to stay away from. And you're not explicitly told that, but that's what everybody around you expresses. You internalize that. Then you really become connected to a Black person. You realize, wow, this is a dividing thing, even to my own mother, you know? So that was the first time racism became painful for me. It wasn't the first time I was aware of racism. It wasn't the first time I realized it was in the world. That was the first time it directly affected me and was a painful experience for me. It still is to this day. I would love nothing more than for my mother to decide she wanted to have a relationship with my kids. That's just not where she is. So I guess for me, early on, even when me and Jamila first got married, it's not like because I married a Black woman, I was instantaneously changed into this, this ally, this radical, let's burn down everything because, Black people need justice in this country. In fact, I remember saying, even before we were dating, when me and Jamila were building our friendship, I remember saying these stupid things to her, like, "Oh, have you ever tried writing poetry? Because I know you like Black music, you like rap. So if you like rap, you'd probably be a great poet, and you're good with words and all this." Like, I said this stuff. That's really dumb to say. Looking back on it, and I'm surprised she put up with it. That's how you knew it was love. It's somewhere in there. But so I even when we got married, she would, first year or two of marriage, she'd say these little things, little microaggressions she'd run into while she's in the graduate program, or even just different things. And she'd tell me, and I would say, well, are you sure, that that's what they meant by that, blah, blah, blah. And I would kind of put her experience under scrutiny, right? Like, I couldn't, even though, which is ridiculous because I grew up in the background I grew up in, right? But still, here I was thinking that, maybe it was something else. Maybe she's missing what happened to her, and it wasn't actually a racist thing. I was kind of a little clueless and tone deaf. And when those uncomfortable situations would arise, instead of drawing closer to her and trusting her experience more, I would fall back on my upbringing and seeing her as her, and this was hurtful to see her as an other, right? Like I started to, in those moments, not in the broad spectrum of our relationship and our marriage, but in those moments when something uncomfortable would come up, instead of trying to understand and asking more questions and immediately taking her side or giving her the benefit of the doubt, her experience became the other experience for me, because that was deeply ingrained in how I thought about Black people and their experience in a white world. So it became confusing at one point, because something that struck me about being a disciple in the church, growing up in white suburbia, I remember coming to church while I was studying and hearing everybody say, brother, sister, that's the greeting, right? And I remember thinking, this is something Black people do. I wonder why we're doing it in this church. Why does this church do that? And of course, it became evident over studying the Bible and the church studies and realizing that, it's about family. It's about we're through the blood of Christ. That is what we are. And I remember thinking like, Black people really understood this before the cross in some way. Like, they have a shared experience that links them together as brother and sister that as a white person, I just don't have. white people grow up with a very individualized experience of the world around them. Like, I'm not linked to Phil in any other way except for he's a disciple. I don't wake up in the morning and think like, man, I wonder if Brother Phil's going to be all right today out there in the world, right? But I realize for Black people, you know, there's this they're linked together, something beyond, you know, just what we can have in the church. You know, in the church, I'm grateful that we're linked by the blood of Christ, and therefore we can call each other brother and sister. But it was apparent to me that there was something that Black people in the church understood on a deeper level than I did, just by how they would use that endearing term. And it really seemed like they meant it. It wasn't a passing phrase. So, you know, I'm going to share a scripture here. Let's do that. Let's go to the Bible. So in Mark chapter 3, okay, in verse, let's start in 31. It's going to be short. It says, "Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, 'Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you.' He replied, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' he asked. Then they looked at those seated in the circle around him, and he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. Whomever does God's will is my brother, sister, and mother.'" You know, and that scripture for me, I think really is telling of what I need to have as a true perspective on who's in the church, right? Like, I need to see everyone in the church as my brother, my mother, my sister. Because Jesus doesn't say this is your family. He said this is my family. Like, the right perspective as a disciple is to see that, wait a second, they're not just my brother and sister. This is Jesus's brother. This is Jesus's sister. This is who Jesus says his family is, right? So I can't diminish that in any way. I don't have the authority or the right to diminish Jesus's family. So it makes me wonder a couple things, like what do I learn from this? It means that for me, especially thinking about racism, that within the church, having the proper view of family is a must. It's an absolute must, because I find that it doesn't matter until it's personal. And here's why. As a white, I imagine a family dinner, and if I had a close family, I do not have a close immediate family, but if I had what everybody imagines as this nice, you know, close family, you sit down for dinner, and imagine your mother or your sister begins to explain how they were harassed at the grocery store. And then, you know, week after week, there's a different case, and they say, yeah, you know what, they're calling me out by name. They're mentioning our last name and saying we don't like your family. And they explain to you that it's like they don't even have to know my name. They can see that I'm related. They can see that I can't think of anybody that would ever question their mother or their sister or that family member's recounting of that story. I couldn't imagine it. In fact, you'd probably be indignant. You'd give them the benefit of that. You'd say, what store was that? I want to know. I'm going to go down there. I'm going to straighten it out. I want to talk to these people. Now, the knee-jerk reaction may not be the most righteous one in the moment, but I think anybody who feels that strongly about their family member at the dinner table expressing that kind of harassment in the world in where you're living would automatically want to defend them, not question them. So I think that's one reason why having a sense of true family in the church matters a lot, is because it matters when it's personal. Second, I could not engage with who I really am as a white person, my upbringing, how I was raised, those things that were ingrained in me before I became a disciple, until I understood those implications of my wrong thinking, right? Like this othering, okay? Here's an example for that. Like, I grew up as a kid hearing that, oh, black people are living this way because that's their culture, or there's not good morals there, or they don't have good family structure. All these things, that's what I was taught. Now, what if one of my kids gets in trouble at school? I have brown kids. I'm a white guy that's a black father. I have to think like a black father. I've learned that over time. If I don't, I'm making a mistake and I'm doing my kids a disservice. So if my kids come home and they say, this such and such happened to me in school, I got in trouble, would I other my own children? No, because they're my kids. Right? I wouldn't say, oh, well, that's because the way you were raised. Well, first, I'm raising them. So why would I act like it's something culturally or just inherently wrong with them because they have brown skin, right? So just me being that close, me actually having brown family, it unearths these things that is actually deeply ingrained in me, and I'm forced to recognize that, okay? So for me, when I got notes here, that's why I'm looking down. So for me, when I call someone, brother or sister in our fellowship, and if I don't truly mean that, and I don't say that meaningfully, and I don't engage knowingly that race affects this relationship, then I'm a hypocrite. If I come up to a black brother or sister and I say, hey brother, hey sister, and I don't mean that you are my family and what you care about, I care about, then I have no right to give you that title if I'm not going to really honor you as Jesus's brother or sister. I have to care about what you care about, or I'm a hypocrite. I think the other thing that I think about now that I look at myself and I can take careful stock of who I am. So I'm either one of three things or a combination of both at some point if I make a wrong assumption. I'm either prideful, foolish, or arrogant to assume that just because I'm a disciple, that all of these things that I've absorbed during my childhood and how I've been raised, as 95% of my brain developed before I was the age of 5, right? If all that stuff was not going to affect my relationships with black disciples, how could I not think that all of that wasn't going to come into play, that it wasn't going to be a way that I framed my thinking in my interactions or my assumptions that I was making, It defies logic to assume that the white world that I live in doesn't affect my black family members when there's direct evidence of that all around me. I mean, I have direct evidence at this point, just, being married to Jamila for almost 16 years. Oh, I almost got in trouble there. Almost 16 years in July, right? Like, I have my own direct experience at this point, and I've watched my kids be treated differently. I've watched it when my oldest son was 2.5. I watched a white woman toss him by the armpits. I've had my youngest get made fun of in school because he has brown skin, and it's 98% white school that he goes to. It defies logic for me to assume that this world does not affect my black family members, right? That's not logical to think that. I'd have to completely be totally delusional and suffer from severe cognitive dissonance to know that without a shadow of a doubt, this is how the world works. Like, I was raised in a racist manner. I had racist neighbors. I had racist friends. It was all around me. How could I then say that it doesn't exist? Or how could I then say it doesn't affect black people? How could I then say it must be all in their head when literally this was the pond that I was swimming in my entire upbringing? This isn't a new concept, okay, for us to be dealing with this in a church. Not at all. Cultural divisions were dealt with in the first century. In Galatians 2, right, verses 11 and 14, I'm not going to read those for the sake of time. But Paul had to oppose Peter because Peter was falling back on his culture. And he was, even though he behaved like it, Paul said, you behave like a Gentile, yet you're forcing the Gentiles to into circumcision. You're telling them that they're not as valuable because you're giving into this cultural pressure, right? And Paul had to straighten out different cultural issues with the churches in the first century. So It's nothing new. But if Peter fell back onto this wrong thinking, right? This is Peter. Then, I mean, is it not impossible for it to happen to me also? Like, am I better than Peter in any way? Like, I don't think I am. So it's also not above me to, if at some point, make the same mistake. I can't other my brothers and sisters in the church. Like they're my brothers and sisters. There's not an other. I can't other them. You know, I'll stop here in just a second, and then Jamila will take back over. But you know, as a father of Black kids, 2 Black boys, as a husband to a Black wife, I can't afford the luxury of pretending that my own past doesn't exist. You know, I can't pretend that systemic racism isn't a thing, because it affects my family. You know, it affects brothers and sisters, not others. The church, if we're real, right, we don't have the luxury either of pretending that also that racism doesn't exist. We don't have that luxury if we're to see each other as family. You know, only with sincere love of family would I be acting according to the true gospel. As a disciple, I only have brothers and sisters. There is no other in the kingdom. I'm gonna kick it back over here to the better half.
Yeah, and we wanna be mindful of the time. So I just wanted to, you know, before we finish, just maybe talk about some of the implications for the different dynamics that both Justin and I have touched on, for how we really interact with each other in the church, and how things play out in the church. Because I think we can overlook some of these things. I know some of these are things that maybe I felt, but haven't really been sometimes I've expressed actually, and other times I haven't expressed. And I think of this 2 ways, like one is interpersonally, and the other is, you know, like institutionally, like more kind of baked into the way things operate. And, you know, interpersonally, I just say 2 things. This is something that I felt, so I'm gonna keep it real. Like, there are times when I felt that Black disciples are treated differently, or disciples of color more generally, according to their proximity to whiteness, right? Or qualities that we associate with whiteness. So, you know, I've seen this firsthand when people perceive you as sort of like a certain kind of Black person, you know? And sometimes I'll see it in rooms. I'll be in the room or in a conversation or around disciples, and it'll almost be like I'm invisible, like I'm not even there. Like I may as well not exist. I don't matter. And then somebody says like, oh, Jamila's a professor at Cornell. And all of a sudden it's like, I'm there. They care about me. It's like the assumption was, you're probably nobody, right? You probably don't matter. And I have to like show that I matter, that I speak a certain way, I carry myself a certain way, I have a certain comportment, I have the credentials to prove to you that I matter. It's one of the reasons why I almost never mention to people when I meet them off the bat anything about Cornell or about what I do. Because I'm like, I want people to, that's my identity. My identity is in Christ. And that has to be the reason why you respect and love me, right? And when I was an undergrad, I went to Princeton. And I remember like being at church conferences and stuff like that. And there would be leaders who would introduce me like, this is Jamila, she goes to Princeton. And it would really get under my skin, because I always felt like I don't want to have a credential to vouch for me, right? I want to be important because of our relationship to each other in Christ, and not because of my socioeconomic background or my education or what have you. The other thing is, and I've talked about this earlier, so I won't spend too long on it, is just the way that I've seen my own sin in this, and just having more superficial relationships with white disciples than I should, because of the feeling that I can't really tell them about what's going on in my life. And that's both ways. It's me sort of pulling back because I don't want to be hurt. I don't want to tell you I got pulled over by the cops again for the 4th time in the last few years, and I never speed. I drive like someone's grandma, but I keep getting pulled over, and I never get a ticket, and I never get a reason why. And when I tell you that, you say, well, you know, and because I don't want to be hurt, I don't even share it with you. And then that's a part of me that you don't know and don't understand. And now it's like we have a whole website so that we can share this experience, but it also shows we haven't been sharing that all along the way, right? We haven't been connecting with each other on a really deep level. And then I also think there are bigger things, and I'll just say a few things and then we have to finish. But I think there are some things that are like more institutional, like a little bit more deeply embedded. And these are just things that have been on my heart over the years. And when Justin and I sat down and we started to think about these, we were like, wow, this is a lot. So we'll just quickly name a few things, just things to think about.
So one of the first things I think is really important that we tackle as a church right off the bat is, when we study the Bible with someone and the sin study comes up, we talk about hatred, and it's like, oh, do you hate anybody? Well, no, I kind of dislike this neighbor, but racism is a hatred, right? Like, we have to talk about racism when we're studying the Bible with new Christians. It didn't happen with me. My grandfather actually got converted. It didn't come up, and that was a really big mistake. So yes, we need to do that.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that I've thought a lot about, like as somebody who's a social scientist, and I'm thinking about how processes like gentrification and racial residential segregation, how those things affect people's lives. Like, that's what I do for a living. And there have been times when I've seen how these things are even affecting us as a church, and I felt really powerless to know what to do about it. So, there have been times when I've seen like disciples, when we've lived in a bunch of different places. In Chicago, we were in the Chicago Church of Christ and the Detroit Church of Christ. And we've lived in these places that were really racially diverse, but also deeply segregated. And there were times when it'd be like, oh, we're all Black. Like, we need more white people, And I remember times I've thought, man, I've been in all white churches, but it's never been like, we're all white. We need more Black people, even to the point where it's like, we got to move to different neighborhoods. Like, we can't just live in all of these Black people neighborhoods. Like, we got to move out to different neighborhoods so we can reach out to different people, which is fine. But there are times where it's felt to me like, are we really thinking about the implications of this and how it can make Black people feel? Even I've seen, and we've seen and experienced like churches splitting where it's like, we're going to divide by geography. So all the disciples who live in this area will be in this region, and all the disciples who live in this area will be in this region. And then because of the reality of residential segregation and racial segregation in the actual world, when we divide ourselves by geography, we're also dividing ourselves by race. And we've been so caught in the middle of that at times, like, wow, okay, I guess we have to be over here with this group. And those are just like things that can be a little bit more baked in, where we're not even necessarily thinking it's about race, but it ends up being about race in ways that perpetuate the same way that the world others us and divides us. And I'll be honest, there are times when those things have made me question and made me struggle. And I've really felt at a loss about how I could, or even whether I could talk to people about it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed at different times, when there's a decision to be made about Bible talk leaders, church leaders, song ministry, you name it, any type of role of leadership, whether it's, any type of small group or anything that requires a decision making. I think, something to consider when you have a choice to be made about who's going to lead some group is not just, who do I think is the best choice, but if you have more than one person to consider, which is probably mostly all the time, right? It's, why would I lean towards this person over another? Yeah, I think we all have these, the word of the day, right, in the media is implicit bias. We all have these things. And I think we have to really interrogate, right, our motives when we're making decisions about who leads a Bible talk, who leads a house church, or even a church in general. And we haven't always done the best job of that as a church as a whole. I think sometimes we can, the word sharp used to fly around back in the day, and sharp could easily be coded as, basically not Black or not different from mainstream whiteness. So I think there's that. I'll touch on one more thing. You have anything else to share?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll touch on one more thing that is more of a system issue sometimes. This is actually a real example. I'm not going to mention the church. It's nowhere in the East Coast. and I'm not going to mention anybody by name, but there's definitely a situation, a real life example here where I know a Black sister in college who was juggling, I think, 2 part-time jobs to pay her way through college. And the church that she's a part of asked her to be a unpaid intern, right? Take on some ministry responsibilities. She would have been open to it, but she would have had to reduce her hours on the job to take on that responsibility. So she asked if she could be paid. She was told that they didn't have money in the church budget to pay her. She literally declined that job, and within 2 weeks, they hired another campus white woman as a part-time paid ministry staff to do just the exact same job that they had asked her to do unpaid. So I think there are things like that that I don't think that was intentional. I don't think it was purposive. But there are things like that that if we're not careful, we cannot pretend as a church that the outside world does not affect how we operate in the church. There's a scripture that talks about, us being, not being of the world, right? We live in the world, but we're not of the world. That is great for individual disciples to think about. But when we apply that to the church, that can have really horrible consequences, because the church is a place where our outside culture comes in and it affects decisions and the way we think. So we can't afford as a church, as a whole body, to think that just because the church is a spiritual organism, that the world around it doesn't have still a very heavy, powerful hand of influence if we're not tending to it properly, if we're not mindful and being watchdogs. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, well, and I guess the one last thing I'll say is this, like, in my work role, there are times when it's really hard for me to feel sort of hopeful about really achieving racial justice. Just, I'll teach classes. I teach a class when we talk about race, and I'm teaching students about hundreds of years of racial oppression, and it's hard to get to the end of that semester and say, but don't worry, everything will be great. Everything will work out just roses. But one of the things I appreciate about being a disciple and about the church is that we have a different kind of hope. And so these problems are wide and they're deep and they're challenging, but we have something really special, which is Jesus. We have Jesus's blood connecting us, and we have God giving us a power that we wouldn't have otherwise. So even though there's a lot that we've said and there are no easy wrap-up answers, like everything will be wonderful, at the end of the day, we do have like a everything will be wonderful, which is it will, and it is ultimately wonderful in Jesus. We just have to do the work of living up to what he calls us to. So I'll end there.
Amen. Guys, wow. Thank you so much for that. In fact, let me do this real quick. Let's just, before we take some questions, I'm going to unmute this, and let's all just show our appreciation to Justin and Jamila real quick. All right, you're unmuted. Yay.
Awesome.
Amen, Justin. And
But yeah.
Okay.
So good.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna just pause it. Just so we can have some time for Q&A here. We are officially finished with our midweek. If you need to go, that's totally fine. Obviously, if you want to stay, that's great too. We did record this. This will be posted at bkchurch.com tomorrow, so you can listen to this if you missed any of it. So what we'll do is we'll do a Q&A. Just what I'll do is, if you have a question, you can raise your hand in your screen. But I'll start off with this real quick. This came in. This was actually the one question that we got ahead of time. So this is, wait, did I mute you guys? I'm sorry. I need to unmute you. Yeah. I think I muted everybody. Yeah, let me unmute you. Okay. So there we go. Okay. So this is the one, we got this one ahead. So we'll lead with this one, and then we'll go to people raising their hands. This is from Joanne Joseph, and she says, I graduated from Cornell in 1987 and always heard about the sit-in at the Strait in the 1960s. Are you surprised to see such parallels of racism today, even though the sit-in at the Strait occurred over 50 years ago?
Wow, I'd love that Cornell connection.
There's a couple.
Yeah.
And I mean, students, it's funny, I advise a lot of student groups, and, a lot of the Black students on campus talk about that sit-in at Willard Straight Hall, and the parallels are really incredible. I'm not surprised at all. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that like nothing has changed between now and then. I mean, even me being at Cornell is like some sort of representation of change that's happened between now and then, even though I'm still the only Black person in my department. But so it's hard because yes, there have been things that have changed and there have been, markers of progress, but in many ways, like some of the core challenges remain. And I'm not surprised, I guess, just because I just think that institutions that have been in place and practices that have been perpetuated, and racism is creative. It takes constantly new forms. So it lingers, and it yields only really very slowly to change. And I think that's more reason for us to be kind of vigilant, and for us to also like have hope that through God, like it can yield more quickly to change in the church than it does in the world, honestly, because it's a hard set of systems and institutions to change outside of, honestly, like almost miraculous intervention.
Amen. All right. Amen. Thank you. All right. We'll take another question. Raise your hand in your screen if you would like to. Just going to scroll through here and see who I see. Are there any more questions? Wait, Yolanda, did you put your hand up? No. Oh, you're moving your screen. Okay, sorry. Go ahead and wave your hand. Any other questions? Nope. Nope. Am I missing anybody? Okay. Awesome.
Michael.
Oh, wait. Did someone raise your hand? Yeah, no? Okay. I'm just scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Oh, there you go. Prince. All right, good job, Prince. Prince, you are unmuted. Go ahead, ask your question.
I'm really asking this for Tay because he put it on the chat. He asked, "How do you have a conversation about race with your kids?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll respond to this one, and maybe Jamila will add. But honestly, how can we not? I mean,
yeah.
I know how I think, right? My knee-jerk reaction, if I see a Black person walking down our street, which I never do because that's just not the area we live in. If I were to do, though, my first question would not be to think, oh, look at them out for a nice little stroll. I'd be like, I wonder what they're doing here, right? So I know if I interrogate the deep recesses of my own heart that still exist, race is an absolute conversation that I must have with my kids. Both of our kids are completely comfortable talking about race. One of them identifies more as Black than the other, given different contexts of conversation. But you know what? It came up early for us because they would ask about, from knee high, they'd ask about, what about Daddy's mom? Are we ever going to meet Daddy's mom? So that was a conversation for us. It was completely unavoidable. So they had to know from a very young age that their grandmother, who is still alive, does not like them because of something as superficial as their complexion. So there's not really a toolkit or a handbook to go by. I'm
sure there are books out there.
I think it just had to be incorporated into everyday life. And I knew it was something that we could not afford to ignore, just because I know how I still will think,
And can I just say really quick, for parents who want resources on this, there's a great, an amazing sister in Chicago. We knew her when we were in Chicago. Her name is Cynthia Langtu, Dr. Cynthia Langtu. She's a PhD, a clinical psychologist, and she actually does work around questions like this: how to talk to your, to your children about racism. She did a whole thing on NPR recently, and we were talking just this week, and she sent me a bunch of materials, and so I don't know if I can like send that to you, Phil, and so people who are interested could have access to those resources. But the great thing is that she's both an expert specifically with kind of clinical psychology and helping children. And she's also like a long-time Christian and faithful and amazing. I do think it's true for us. We haven't really ever had much of a choice. And because of what I do, like, I'm very comfortable talking about race. I talk about it all the time. Our kids talk about it all the time. I guess the one thing I would say is, like, when opportunities emerge, don't shy away from them. And I've seen parents who are like, oh my gosh, oh no, I guess we can't talk about this. And they kind of push it under the rug or tell kids not to talk about it. And our approach is, like, when we get a chance to talk about it, we absolutely talk about it.
I think it would be much more difficult for an all-white family.
But even then, you'll get chances.
Yes, yes. I mean, naturally for us, it's mommy's dark, daddy's white. Like, for us, the questions from the kids happen as soon as they can talk. Yeah. So for us, in a way, we benefit from it being something extremely obvious.
Yeah. And I would say if your kids aren't bringing it up, that's something to wonder about, because, you know, I could think of, you know, preschool experiences that my kids were having. Our youngest, when he was 2 and he was in preschool, came home and said, X little girl, or no, he was 3, maybe 3.5, and told us about the little girl who said, you know, all of the rest of us, like, look, our skin is white and yours is brown, you know? And I asked him what he said to her, and he said that he turned her hand over and pointed to her palm and his palm and said, but look, we're the same there. And then they were kind of like, okay, and that's the value of being 3, you know? But, you know, and our little guy, like, just last year in kindergarten, he had a kid who was making fun of him because of his brown skin and saying he looked like he was dirty. And so, I mean, if your kids aren't bringing it up, it's probably not because they're not seeing it or exposed to it in some way. It might be because they don't know how to. And so I might even encourage initiating that conversation. Definitely don't avoid the conversation, but also maybe initiate it.
Because if you're not teaching your kids God's view on race, the world is definitely going to teach them its view.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you, guys. All right. A couple more questions. I'm looking at the chat here. People are saying, Phil, look at the chat, but I wasn't looking at the chat. So now I'm looking at the chat. Let's go with Kenny. Kenny has a question, and then after that, Natasha has a question. So we'll go Kenny, then Natasha. Go ahead, Kenny. Are you?
Or Daisy too.
Are you there? Kenny, are you there? Oh, no. Kenny, you are unmuted. Are you there? Okay. Let's do this. We'll skip to, just for the sake of time here, we'll go to Natasha. Natasha, go ahead and ask your question. You are, go ahead, Natasha.
Okay. Hi, so my question is more so, since we're predominantly Black and people of color in this congregation.
Wait, Natasha, hold on. There's a lot of echo.
Oh, hold on 1 second.
If you could maybe.
Another device is on, maybe.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah. Go ahead. We can do it. We can. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it should work now. How's that?
We're good.
Perfect.
Okay, good. So no, I was wondering just how the white supremacist ideals play out in a church where there's people of color. I have a similar layered background as far as being of Haitian descent, not speaking of race, and even I grew up with my parents kind of saying don't be like the African Americans who live in the projects or whatever. And so there's lots of layered complexities within the church, and then there's not only Black people of color, there's Hispanic or Latinx and all that stuff. And so we might have different views, but the whole idea and notion of proximity to whiteness and wanting to attain that. Can you talk about how those dynamics can play out even in the church, and how we can even in some ways be prejudiced, or even with the colorism or whatever, how that would play out?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. you know, and my experience growing up was the same as yours. My parents were like, don't be like those Black Americans, even though I was born here. And at some point I got old enough that I was like, wait a minute, I am a Black American. And they'd be like, no, you're different. And, you know, I think there's no place where I haven't seen that. And so I think there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't come into the church. And what I said about like how we can treat each other differently based on proximity to whiteness isn't only true of how white people treat Black people in the church, it can be true of how Black people treat each other, right? So that when there's a Black person who we view as more respectable and in that way, like, you know, more proximate to whiteness, maybe in the way they dress and where they live, in their background, even other Black people or people of color, right, can then treat that person better because of that. Whereas we can look at Black people, for example, who aren't like that and treat them really differently. You know, I mentioned that my brother is the person who helped me to become a disciple and who reached out to me. And, you know, my brother and I are really different. Like, my brother didn't finish college and, you know, he drives an Uber, and he's an amazing, faithful, like, guy who is constantly teaching me things about the Bible and about scriptures. But if you look at him, like, he's really easy to just discount as like some like hood looking Black guy, you know? And I've seen people do it where, you know, the voice that he has, even in the church, and the extent to which people are willing to listen to him is just totally different, the way people respond to him than the way they respond to me. And some of that is perceptions of our proximity to whiteness. And so I think even as people of color in the church, you know, we need to be thinking about this and interrogating how we're treating one another, what we're thinking about one another, what we're assuming about one another. And I don't like false equivalencies. So I'm careful about saying something like everybody's racist, you know, because that's not true. And racism is fundamentally about power, which is why it's not really the accurate way to describe things when you're talking about things between people of color. Because if you're not in the dominant group, there's not the same kind of power relation. But prejudice is something that we can all interrogate and that we can all perpetuate if we're not aware of ourselves. So I think that we, as disciples, like from a perspective of humility and learning, we all need to be looking for these things in each other. You know, that person's not leadership material or not somebody I would really take advice from or whatever. And for me, I'm always like, well, why? And if there's anything, I really try to push myself to think about if there's anything there that isn't rooted in spiritual principles, or even if I'm twisting and turning spiritual principles to try to make sense of some knee-jerk bias that I have that I'm not really bringing into the light. And so I think even you asking the question, Natasha, is so important because it's bringing it into the light, and it needs to be there for us to be able to really respond to it and address it. Thank you for that question.
Amen. Thank you, guys. Okay, we are running out of time here, so we're going to go ahead and end things now. Oh, hold on one second. Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. My wife has a question. She's sitting right next to me.
Hi, guys.
Okay. Let's close out with one more question.
She's in
Actually, wait, hold on. Before you do that, are you guys okay on time? Because I'm being respectful of your time.
Yeah.
No, we're in for the long haul.
Okay. Because we can keep going, man.
I am here
it'd be
to answer
11:30.
all the-
Well, like one more question.
I'm here to answer all the questions people wanted to ask a white person for forever, but just couldn't get it out.
Oh, amen, bro. All right.
Don't hold back.
If you're okay with time, then we can. Oh, and then we got some more questions coming in here. Okay, go ahead, Leslie, and then we'll go back.
With everything you're studying and learning and all the pain that goes with it, how have you been able to maintain your hope?
Yeah, that's great. I was talking to Shyla Smith, who leads here in Syracuse, about this recently, and I was telling her in some way, like, I and even we kind of have a head start. And so it's not that everything going on right now with George Floyd hasn't like really affected me and doesn't affect me. It absolutely does. But because I'm so immersed in thinking about this stuff all the time, I feel like over time I've had to develop like coping mechanisms so that I'm not always like emotionally depleted, and even so that I'm not like mad all the time. You know, I know that when I teach my course about race, that there's just like weeks long period where I'm spending a lot of time, like everything I'm reading, all the conversations I'm having with students, my lectures I'm prepping, I'm just spending like 20, 30 hours a week thinking about white supremacy and institutional racism, you know? And then I go to church and it's like the slightest thing, you know? It's like, wow, your hair looks so different. And someone touches my hair and I'm like, you stop touching my, and it's like, well, yes, you shouldn't be touching my hair, but also like, there's other things going on here emotionally, you know? And so for me, like some things for me is I do have a group of people that I can be completely real with, that I can talk to about anything I'm feeling, that I can say like, man, my heart's not right. I just feel like I don't want to be around white people today. Like, I just don't. And I need to be able to have a sister or two that I can say that to. I will be honest.
You got to let them know I'm not included in that.
He's never included.
Yeah.
He's not even, it's a different level. I'll tell him that sometimes, honestly. I'll come home.
And I'll agree.
Yeah, I'll come home and tell him about some conversations I had with students or with my colleagues at work. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, if I talk to one more white person today. But then I just have to pray about it because that's not right. You know, it's how I feel, but it's not right. So for me, it's constant prayer, and it's having people that I can voice those things with, that I can really, without feeling like I'm dumping on people, you know, but like it has to come out of me, because when I stuff it, it ends up coming out anyway, but unrighteously in how I'm thinking about and feeling towards people. So really pouring it out in prayer and in my relationships. It is great for me being married to Justin because I can tell him any of this stuff. He's never going to be like, don't say that, or you can't feel that way, or what about me? Or there's never that reorientation towards making it about him. So you got to find your people that you can be that way with. And obviously it doesn't have to be, you know, if as a Black person, it doesn't have to be another Black person. Although I think that probably is going to be more common. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say. So much prayer, honestly, because I just, you know, Satan just wants to plant bitter roots in our hearts, and there's so many opportunities to do that with these issues.
Amen. Thank you. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah,
We're good to go, man.
Let's do 2 more. All right. All right. First of all, we've got Patty, who's been raising her hand, and then after that, Kenny's question has finally arrived. Oh, there's Kenny. I see Kenny. Kenny and Valerie, they got like a team effort going on there, so they get extra points for working together. So let's let Patty go first, and then we'll have Kenny ask his question. Okay, go ahead, Patty. Are you there?
Yeah. First of all, you said her, I'm a guy.
Okay,
But
that's not Patty, but go ahead.
Anyways, secondly, so as someone who has, I've grown up, my whole family's Haitian, and so I've grown up in Brooklyn, and so I've been around Black American, Caribbean, etc. There's been this like internal struggle of, well, I don't unfortunately speak Creole, and so there's a struggle there where, and I've had this conversation with people where I'm not considered Haitian enough. And then there's this, well, you're not Black American, and so you don't have that history of struggle within this particular country that you're living in. And clearly, I'm not white, I'm Black like this. And so I can't join in that conversation, even though I do love, Paul Simon and such like that, right? Stereotypical white music. Anyways, I'm not anything else, right? I'm not Asian, I'm not whatever. So I find myself in this weirdly specific area where I don't feel Black enough, I don't feel Haitian enough, I'm clearly not white, and I can't pass for anything else.
Yeah.
The issue of race hits me differently because there's a rage and then there's a distance at the same time.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, how do I engage white counterparts, Black counterparts, Haitian peers, everything like that, in a meaningful way, and deal with the prejudice that maybe happen in the church, in a way that's true to my identity. Because at the end of the day, for me, I think of myself as Christian first, as Jesus, disciple first and everything else second. And
Yeah.
so even my perspective might not be as gung-ho as some people have felt.
Yeah.
And so I've struggled. I don't go out to protest. That's just, I don't think that's something that I need to do. I have my views on how to protest and fight against it in other ways. I'm trying to be a therapist. And so that field doesn't have people that look like me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if that even made sense to you guys. There's a lot of rambling in there. There was a question somewhere, but yeah.
It makes so much sense. I mean, it's this kind of liminal status where you're kind of in between, you know? And, you know, one thing I would say is to embrace that, because there are ways in which being in between allows you to see things that you might not otherwise see, you know? I think that, you know, having that kind of like different kind of cultural background with your, you know, your Haitian family may allow you to see times when, you know, we are either making assumptions about who different experiences and situations apply to, or even assumptions about the kind of the homogeneity of Black people, like that they're all the same, right? I think we have to embrace that there is a kind of common thread. I mean, I think this is the concept of diaspora, right? That there is a common thread, and this is why we've seen protests not just in the US, but all over the world. And there's a reason why people, in particular Black people all over the world, are responding to this, right? Because there is something that we share in a kind of global historical sense, and that you are a part of, right? And so I think it's recognizing the things that you're a part of, and then also embracing even the ways that maybe you don't neatly fit. And I would also say, like, you know, I love that you're solid in your identity as a Christian. I think that's absolutely crucial. And not everybody is going to express their racial or their ethnic identity in the same way. So protesting doesn't have to be how you express it, you know? You don't have to necessarily poo-poo on anyone who does want to express it that way, but you don't have to do it that way either. You might say, I have this field, this is where I'm going to invest my energy. I think embrace that and allow God to use you in the ways that you're authentically being you. You don't have to be someone else, you know? I get this in different ways sometimes. You're not really Caribbean, but also a lot of Black people telling me I'm not really Black. I'm practically white. I'm married to a white man. I live in upstate New York surrounded by white people. I teach at a college my Blackness is always being questioned, you know? And so it's almost like, okay, I have to know who I am in my own self and who I am in Christ, and how I'm gonna like tap into these different identities that Christ has given me to figure out what role I can play within those identities authentically, with my Christian identity at the center. But you don't have to fit into any of those categories. And your in-between status can be exactly the reason why God is able to use you in ways that he wouldn't otherwise be able to use you.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things I feel like, you know, we talk about, you know, shining light onto the darkness, right? Where being open is really important, right? I think even what you shared about how you feel about being in between and, you know, not necessarily agreeing with, you know, one particular majority or another particular group is really important, you know, because what's indicative of the entire problem of racism in America, and also, what was the other word you used?
Diaspora.
No, that was a big word you shouldn't have used because I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
But the, not race, the other.
Colorism?
Yes, and that, right? Like the whole problem is phenotypically judging people by the way we look, by the way we appear. And in the church, the way we can make more sense of who we are, and we can understand each other more deeply, and we can get the richness out of the kingdom that we're intended to have and benefit from, is by all of us sharing that depth of who we are and how we identify and how we're brought up and how we're raised to think about ourselves and others, for good or bad, right? And that's how we grow as a church together. And it starts with brave individuals like you who can express, man, I look like a Black American if you were to judge me, but that's not how I identify, or that's a part of what I feel, or openness is really key for all of us to fully get the benefit of the kingdom that God intended.
Okay, Kenny has been waiting very patiently. You guys ready? Here we
Yeah.
go. I don't mean ready for Kenny. I just mean, are you ready for another question? But you should be ready for Kenny. Here comes Kenny. Right, Kenny? Here you go, bro. You're good, right?
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Kenny. Oh,
Oh.
I see you. You're unmuted.
How about his?
You got a microphone? Is it plugged in?
Let's see.
Oh, I feel for Kenny.
Kenny, you're so
I
close.
He can type words and hold them up to his camera.
So close, Kenny. There's a list of questions mounting here.
We are okay with time, by the way.
You are okay.
Do
Okay.
not feel rushed on our behalf.
Okay.
We're
As
good.
Kenny works on his technology, we'll come back to you, Kenny. All right, we've got a question here that I just lost it. How can you teach children to be high achieving without falling into modeling the myth that them being high achievers will insulate them from the treatment that Black people receive in society?
Yeah, that's a good one. And by the way, somebody in the chat says they can ask Kenny's question. I don't know who that person is.
Okay. All right. We'll do that after you answer this question. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
No, so I personally think for me, like, I've learned this lesson over and over and over again, you know.
I've watched it.
And he's watched it, you know, from like, we knew each other when I was an undergrad at Princeton, and there were just times where it's like, man, here I am at Princeton. It doesn't matter if I'm at this fancy school or how good my grades are, or like, there are still so many instances where I'm being treated differently, or even where it's very hard for people to believe that there's such a thing as a high achieving Black person. I mean, I remember—
You don't look like a professor.
I know. I couldn't tell you how many of my students are like, wow, you know, when I walked into class, I was so surprised. You don't look like a professor. And I'm always like, well, what does a professor look like? And then they kind of like turn red because they're so embarrassed, because the wheels start to turn and they're like, oh no, maybe this isn't a good idea that I said this. And, you know, I think with our kids, like our oldest son is just super, super sharp. Like academically, things just come easy for him. And he's just always at the top of the class, and it's a breeze. And he's very much that kind of kid. And we have, from day one, like in kindergarten, where they were like, Jace is really advanced, we would always tell him, like, you know, sweetie pie, like, you're really smart and that's great, but that's not who you are. That's not your identity. That's one part of a gift that God has given you. But here are all of these other things that you're going to have to think about. And I think with high achieving, you know, with academics and achievement in general, you have to keep that stuff in its proper place. One of the things I'm really grateful for about becoming a Christian is that I think, had I not become a Christian, like, that part of me, it was such a central part of my identity. I wanted to get out of Queens. I wanted to get out of the hood. I wanted to live a better life than nearly everyone I saw around me. And that really drove me to achieve in school. At some point I was like, I remember around 5th grade, I was like, I'm not pretty enough to be a model. I'm not gonna be a dancer or an athlete. Like, what bowl am I going to put what eggs am I going to put my basket in so that
What basket?
What basket am I going to put my eggs in? Yeah. So that I can get out of here. So like, I'm not living in this my whole life. And I decided it was academia, and it would have very easily overtaken me. And the reason it didn't, honestly, was because of God. So I guess my real answer to the question is, in general, achievement should never be centered, right? It should be encouraged, and it should be something that you help your children understand is important and help them understand why. But if that's never the core centerpiece of their identity, they'll never expect it to protect or save them from anything. It can't save you from hell. It can't save you from being discriminated against.
Nope.
If you keep it in its proper place, like, then it will be much easier to help your children understand that broader context.
Yeah, the racial discrimination permeates every level of our society, rich or poor. and the way I know that for sure is I've never experienced any of it, and I don't have any credentials. I never even went to college. And so there's that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Amen. Amen, bro. Thank you. All right. I think we figured out how to get Kenny. Kenny, are you there, Kenny?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me.
Kenny. Oh, hey, sorry, we're out of time, Kenny. No, I'm kidding, bro. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, here's a question. It's for Justin, really.
Okay.
I wanted to know, what was the struggle when you realized your prejudices? Like, what did you go through mentally, through your heart? How did you deal with, oh, wow, I have racist tendencies? And also, how did you respond to being attracted to a Black woman? Did that throw you off as well? Like, wait a minute, she's Black, I'm white. How does this work? Like,
It threw me off.
Yeah, I think it threw her off. No, those are great questions. So one, it was more like, for me, it was more like connecting dots more than like a sudden realization. It wasn't like slamming the brakes on in a car and like my whole world just all of a sudden closed in and be like, wait a second, I have racial tendencies going on. It was, for me, it was not that. For me, it was kind of like connecting the dots and being being one with Jamila, when she would say things, when she would explain her experiences, I would think in my mind like, I think I've probably done that before. I think I think I know why I'm doing that. Like, and so even looking back now, being able to say without a shadow of a doubt, I grew up in a racist household. That's not something maybe even 8 years ago I would have been able to say without a shadow of a doubt. It's more like putting the pieces together as I've grown, as I've matured, both with, racial awareness maturity and spiritual maturity. Being able to see myself clearly and being able to see how sin has affected me, right? Like, sin has taught me, well, I got baptized right after I turned 17, 35 now. So sin has had a long time to teach me stuff. So it's kind of realizing how much of an impact all of those formative years really had. And it takes a long time to process that, to realize that, wow, I'm implicated in a sense, not that I am overtly, have done horrible racist things, but I'm implicated because I know that the majority of white America thinks just like I do, except unchecked, right? So that for me, like I said, it's not like slamming the brakes on a car where I suddenly had this realization. It was more of a long-term growth process where God was long-suffering, waiting for me to understand how much I need him and how much damage has been done to me because of the way sin has affected American society ever since its conception. To answer your second question.
I want to hear this one.
Yeah. So to answer your second question, Jamila and I started off as friends, then like really good friends, where like we could just hang out. Like, I don't know, like we're extremely different in many, many ways. We're obviously, racially, obviously we're different in all on paper, right? I would say Jamila and I are about as opposite as you can get. I like I said, I didn't go to college. The way I grew up was different. Everything is different on paper. But the way me and her think and process things around us, we're very much in line with. And we kind of realized that, and we would develop this, this just a friendship where we could just talk and just enjoy, learning about each other. So it kind of started off as a friendship, and then we were like, wow, we're kind of like best friends. And now to make it even more awkward, when we were building this friendship, I was still in high school and she was in college, right? Yeah. So there's 3 years between us. So yeah, at some point I thought to myself, I am not a risk taker by nature. I'm not a gambler. I don't take risks in the core of my nature. So I thought to myself, first off, I want to marry a disciple. I know that. Second, she's really smart and pretty. And third, I'm attracted to her. I wouldn't mind dating her, so let's date. And honestly, I knew that there was no point in like dating around or anything like that. I was like, there's no reason why eventually I can't marry this woman, because I find her attractive. She is highly intelligent, and first and foremost, she loves God more than anybody else. And I knew that she would love God more than me. And by no means am I saying, oh, you know, I found her attractive because her love for Jesus, right?
That should be why.
Yes, ideally, but keeping it real, right? I became attracted to her because I was able to see past the superficial things. I was able eventually to see past the differences that I was taught to only see. The spotlight became about, for me, what I began to see illuminate more clearly was her as an entire person and not her as a unique experience or somebody different from me. And then shortly after that, I became very attracted to her as well physically. It took her, by the way, longer. There was more of a delay there with her for me. I'll just say that and throw her under the bus.
I never imagined myself with a white person, honestly. And it was a heavy lift. God had to really change my heart because I was like, I'm not going to date a white man. I'll just keep it real. And I was discipled because of it. Like, my best friend was like, well, you guys, you're great friends. Like, why wouldn't you even think about it? I was like, yeah, no. There's going to be this whole part of my identity that he can't possibly understand. I just didn't think it could possibly work. And there's really no explanation besides that God changed my heart eventually.
Amen.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for your honesty. Can you do 2 more questions? Are you still good?
Whatever you want.
You guys are doing
have the most
awesome.
fun. You have the best question.
Dude, you are all right. So Hans has been waiting, and then we'll do Hans, and then we'll do Victoria. All right, Hans has been trying very patiently. Hans, you there?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead, bro.
Hi, Justin.
What's up?
Jamila? You actually look very familiar, Justin. I can't remember where I've seen you.
Were you in Queens?
Yeah, I can't remember where. Well, I know a lot of people in Queens. I have a lot of friends there.
Yeah.
And my mom lives in Queens, but I've seen, where have I seen you guys? Definitely you, Justin, yes. You look familiar. But my question is, okay, I'm trying to figure out if I could put it the right way. So I'm also Haitian, but I was born in Haiti. And Patrick, we love you, Patrick. So yes, the thing is, I think sometimes, I think coming to this country, I felt like, because I'm the analytical thinker, yada, 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 right? And I think a lot of time I felt like coming to this country, I felt similar to Patrick, but I was kind of like the Haitian kid that's not African-American. So sometimes with the African-American, we talk about what they went through or the way they feel toward whites. I didn't feel that. I saw whites as like interesting. Oh, I want to learn more about whites. It wasn't like, I didn't feel any issues. I didn't feel any threats. I didn't feel any this, yeah, I don't really have any issues with white people. But sometimes I felt like it was hard to connect with what African Americans were going through. And sometimes I couldn't really understand it. Yeah. And I think sometimes, our view as foreigners coming in, like the foreign blacks coming to America, I think sometimes, African Americans can feel like we come off. I mean, sometimes I'm going to keep it real, there are some that do come off like that. But sometimes also there's also because of disconnect. Because like in Haiti, I didn't see a lot of whites. I didn't feel that tension. Like Haiti's been on its own for a while, for a lot longer. Yeah. So it's almost like when you come to America, it's almost like the kid that's going through stuff and he's trying to heal, but he's still like getting it repeated. It's like he's in the household, but he's still experiencing it. I'm like, oh yeah, we've been moved on from that. But when I come here, oh, now it's back. But now I'm grouped in with you guys experiencing it. I don't know if that's making sense. So a lot of time I think in terms of how do I really work on being sensitive towards like, for those that were born here, whether or not you're Haitian or not, but if you raised here and you experienced it, and there's that history linked to your family, that's very recent. That was only 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Me coming in, I was like, what are you talking about? So how do you make that connection in terms of being sensitive towards the racism and the experiences So I don't know if that makes sense, but I just threw it out there. I hope you guys can make sense of it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
You tackle it
Yeah.
head on, and I'll add in the tail end.
That makes so much sense, and I think, like, you know, I mean, again, like Justin said earlier, just even being able to articulate that is really important, you know, because I remember, because I was born here, but my parents weren't, like, I remember I'd hear my parents having certain conversations about Black Americans, and they have a chip on their shoulder. Now my parents are completely different because they've experienced so much. They've been here for so long. And, you know, at some point, at least for my dad, he experienced so much racism himself that he started to really be able to relate. But I remember this tension, like, wow, they seem to be thinking and feeling about this one way. And then, like, but I had the benefit of really being able to blend in, right? Because I was born here, and, like, you know, but I think that part of what is required, even from your perspective, is a certain kind of work. Like, as Justin was describing, like, his history and his background, in order to really be able to have a connection to brothers and sisters in the church and be like family, there's a lot of work he has to do to understand why they feel the way they feel, to understand their life experiences, to understand the conditions they're living in, and even to understand their history. And as he does that work, he's able to better connect and to better make sense of what they're going through. And I think there's a version of that that's different, but you know, parallel for everyone, right? So for Black people who weren't born here or didn't grow up here or have a different history, there's the work of really trying to understand, you know, as opposed to like, man, these Black Americans, they got chip on their shoulder. They always mad at white people. What's wrong with them? Like, to kind of slow down and say, wait a minute, this is coming from somewhere. How can I give them the benefit of the doubt? How can I not carry over the same stereotypes that everybody else has? And now I, as a fellow Black person, but just not a Black American, I can be perpetuating some of these same stereotypes and biases. Right. And so it's like thinking about that. How can I make sure that I'm really trying to understand on multiple levels and registers, so I don't actually also become, you know, a channel for perpetuating some of these harms? I think at the same time, on the end of Black Americans, it's really important to think, how can I think about connections with Black people beyond just people who have experienced exactly what I've experienced? And how can I want to understand and want to learn more and want to understand where Black people might be coming from who haven't grown up here? So I think there's work on both ends to really try to understand one another and understand one another's experiences, and not like say, well, you're not in my same group because you don't understand. You haven't been through what I've been through. But really to say, let me bring you in and let me help you to understand what I've been through. And for that to happen reciprocally on both ends, so that we can truly begin to break down these barriers, because there are things that we have in common, you know, when you think about like interactions with police officers, they're not going to stop and be like, but wait, Hans, are you Haitian? You know, like, so some of those situations can be shared, you know, and that can be an initial point of connection. And then from there, you can build out and understand the pieces of your experiences that are not shared, you know?
I'll just add something very quickly so we can get to more questions. So maybe from the other side of Alice in Wonderland's looking glass, on the white side of the looking glass, right? Some of what Black Americans who are born, raised here, have that history of racism. Some of what they're feeling, I can attest to the fact that it's absolutely true, in the sense of I've had coworkers who will say racist things, right? And then it's hilarious when I would flip open my toolbox lid and they'd see a picture of my wife, and then they're like, their face turns, you know, pale white. They're like, oh my gosh, what? And then they're trying to go through all the things they said in their head, because they're so, they know that they've said things out loud, and now they know that they've outed themselves as a racist to a white guy who obviously has a Black wife, and they're you know, stumbling over their words. But I will tell you that what they then say to try to make up for it is like, oh, well, we're not talking about like your wife, she's different from them. But the problem is, what I know and what they also know is they didn't, the person they were talking about, they judged them solely on the way they looked. They didn't analyze this person's character or know their background, their credentials, what country they grew up in, if they immigrated to America or not. To those racist white people, all they saw was, this is a black person, and this is the way I think about black people. So for you, it's interesting. There's a distinction to be made, but for somebody who has a racist background and mindset, there's no distinction to be made. So.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go Victoria, then Xavier, then Ate. All right, here we go. Victoria, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you guys so much for what you've shared so far. It's been amazing. My question was more so to Justin's point that he mentioned earlier, that you know, you said your grandfather had gone through the studies and he hadn't really, well, he had, you know, gotten saved, and he didn't really go over his hatred and racism, that, you know, things that may have existed in, you know, in those areas of his life. I guess my question is, like, what can we do for people who are in the fellowship who do struggle with those same things and are unable to see, you know, past certain, you know, implicit biases that they may have, or, you know, prejudgments that they may have, yeah, when we see it come to surface?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little bit of background. So my grandfather got baptized when he was 70. He's since passed away, I think two years ago.
Almost 2 years now. Yeah.
And for him, he was unwilling to confront my grandmother about her racism, right? So I believe at some point he realized where he was at wasn't exactly the best thinking and was wrong, but he was also unwilling to challenge his wife, who he's one with, and that caused him a lot of internal struggle. At the same time, at that point when my grandfather became a disciple, it was shortly after that the church went through a restructuring, and he wound up in an offshoot group that started out as like a little house church and then never reconnected to the broader part of the body. So he wound up in a limited resource pool of just other white disciples around his age. So he wasn't in a nurturing environment that had the richness of the soil, the spiritual soil that he could have been nourished with, and therefore also challenged. So he wound up, just always having that weakness. At the same time, I was able to speak to him on his deathbed, and to see him a couple days before he died. And he was asking about Jamila and the boys and wanted to know. But in dealing with our brothers and sisters who want to deflect or ignore racism and how it may affect their personal relationships or relationships in the church or church structure, and who just refuse to see it as something that is worth talking about. To be honest, you can kind of meet them where they're at. Like if they show interest in learning, or you prod a little bit and then they say like, I'll think about that, right? There's wiggle room to help. I think if somebody is obstinate, gotta watch my word usage here, obstinate to the idea of being challenged or being presented with, your reality, the way that you live, the world that you have to face when you wake up in the morning. And they seem just to be very against understanding that or sharing in that perspective or being compassionate or empathetic in that way. Honestly, there's not too much you can do. Biblically, we're told that, God waters the seed, we can't force anybody to grow, right? That has to come through the Spirit. It has to come through God. we can help, we can give instruction, but we can't, unfortunately, right? Like if somebody doesn't want to see, we don't have that power to change a heart in that way. We can present somebody who has those prejudices or those implicit biases or racialized ways of thinking with the truth. We can provide them with just the availability to your time to teach, if that's something you want to do. I don't think Black people should have that burden of reaching out to white people and white brothers and sisters and taking that on, because it's too big of a burden to carry. But I think about Jesus and the rich young ruler, right? Where Jesus didn't chase after him when he realized he wasn't going to give up his wealth, and he wasn't going to. Jesus didn't go running after him and say, "Hey, wait! I got more to show you. I got more to teach you. Please come back." What Jesus did is he looked at him with compassion, and he felt sorry for the guy. And there's that. I mean, the underlying thing that it's like a weed in your garden. What you see seems so simple, right? So obvious to tackle, but underneath there's so many roots, and they've been there for so long, drinking up all this poison. And even if you can see that the weed needs to be pulled, and the person might even recognize, man, this is not a desirable part of my character, digging out the roots, they have to go to the relationship with God for that. And otherwise you're going to find yourself trying to force someone to understand a reality which they're not open to. So I hope that made sense.
Okay, let me just continue. We got more questions. I'm watching the chat. I think I've thrown everybody off because my name doesn't say Phil Garrison. It says BK Church. So if you're looking for me in the chat, it's BK Church. I see people, but I am trying to give everybody one question. There's multiple people who want to do more questions. I'm just trying to give everybody a chance to do a first question before we get on to people's second or third questions. But are you guys okay? Because is there a better venue we could do this? Because this is just gold here, and I want to respect your time. If you can keep going, we'll keep going.
Are your kids okay? Are they in bed?
They're totally fine.
They actually look forward to when we do stuff like
love
this.
this.
They're basically like, yay, no bedtime.
They realize that the more quiet they are, the later they can probably.
So true. Okay, all right.
They got you.
All right. Okay. Here's the thing. Then you just say at any point. I'll keep checking. But you can say,
just tell us when's
I
the
gotta
last
stop.
one. Yeah.
Okay. We're also having fun. So.
Okay, good. Well, you guys are amazing. Here's what I got. I got Xavier. I've been going through and just looking at everybody's hands, everyone. So I got Xavier, then Ate, then Wale, Tanasha, Ozzy, Farah, and Tamoy. That's the order we're going in here. So
Thank you, Sean.
and then we got Crystal. I'll add Crystal. So let's go ahead and Xavier, are you there? Xavier? Hello?
Yes.
Okay,
hello.
Go ahead.
Hey
Bro.
guys. I'm tagging my wife in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I had a question for Justin, and thank you so much, both of you, for all that you shared. And I don't want to keep asking the same questions that have already been asked. I think what I'm wondering is, in your congregation, and I know you spoke about different things that would happen that were unintentional but still hurt. How did you deal with it, and how did you pull in the leadership to also address that so that you could create a healthier body and really raise awareness in the body?
So I think it's different because each experience we've kind of shared. Oh, is our computer running out of power?
I'll plug it in.
We got to plug this thing in.
You answer.
We're like down to 2%. That might be the one thing that stops us. But we're gonna plug it in here. I have no idea what angle you're all looking at of me right now.
You're good.
But all of these examples that we went through of different things that we've seen happen in the church, right? Because of the underlying just implicit racism, right? They've happened in different ministries. Me and Jamila, we started out, she got baptized in Queens, right? We both spent the majority of our, young Christian days in the Central Jersey Church.
Yeah.
Which I don't remember experiencing too much there, other than like Bible talk, leader stuff, weird campus ministry dynamics.
Yeah.
But there we were kind of too young to,
Yeah.
we were too immature to like put a finger on anything, if that makes any sense. I was 18.
Yeah.
We were too young at that moment. In Chicago, when we first got to Chicago, that was when the churches were all restructuring.
Yeah. It was like 2004.
Right. And to be honest, I've never directly confronted leadership on an issue like that, which I guess any type of misstep in terms of racial undertones or a microaggression. I think, honestly, I kind of feel a little bit the way Jamila has described her feeling in the past. Is for the longest time in the church, how do you bring that up?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not any type of impressive leader person. I'm a regular Joe Schmo.
That's not true.
So yeah, I don't feel like there's always been a welcoming culture in our church to have an open door invitation to bring any of that stuff to anybody that's in position of leadership, right? What I have done from my perspective, like for me personally as a white person, is I have, I guess, lended an ear and validated some of these things. And it's like if a black brother or sister said something to me, hey, I felt this way, I'd be like, yeah, I could totally see that. That makes a lot of sense. I honestly can't think of any time I went up to somebody in leadership and said, hey, that was probably, a racist thing that you did, or that could have had racialized implications. No, I've never done that. Honestly, in the future, because of these conversations we're having with our churches widespread now, I think leadership is more open to honestly receiving that critical feedback. I don't know if that was all. I never perceived that was always an open door invitation. I never felt like, even as a white person, I had the ability to bring any of that up with anybody in leadership. I also think mainly because the racial ideas are seen as something that's political, even though we know that race is not a political issue. It's a spiritual issue that has been politicized, but that's not the way, that's just not it hasn't been the church's standpoint forever. So yeah, I'm sorry to say I have never confronted anybody directly about it. I've, for the most part, more have, been in the background of just helping people of color to understand that they're not crazy. So yeah, does that make sense?
Amen. Thank you, bro. Okay, next I had said Ate, but Ate was honest enough to remind me that he already asked a question through Prince. So he was being very righteous. And Wale is next, but Wale has decided to pass and let someone else for the sake of time. So we're going to go with, I believe, Tanasha I have next here. Tanasha, are you there? Is it Tanasha or Liz?
It's both of us.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. All right, Tanasha and Liz, go ahead.
Well, Liz is in the kitchen. My question is, when our brothers and sisters who are not Black, when they ask me like how I'm doing and they're sharing like, they're saying, I'm open to being a listening ear for you and I want to be there for you. I'm trying to get past my own prejudices to share with them, to be open with them. And I want to know how you kind of push through that. Because like sometimes it takes me like, well, most of the time actually, it's been like 1 or 2 days later that I'll respond to them. And sometimes I just feel like I can easier respond to like, oh, a Black person. Someone's like, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, sister, let me tell you. And then if it's like a Spanish brother or sister, I'm like, oh, bro, sis, let me tell you. But when it's like, I have Asian brothers and sisters who are hitting me up and they're like, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like shrinking into a shell because I can be fearful of what the responses that I've normally gotten in the past. Like, well, why don't you view it this way? Well, maybe that's not. So I'm like, this is great. How do you push through that?
Yeah, I think that's great. The first thing I'll say is this, like, it's okay to give yourself time, you know? It's not, and to be honest about that, you can say like, I mean, I've gotten a lot of emails from honestly just random disciples over the last couple of weeks just because I've done different things and people are like, oh, I have questions for you, or I want to talk to you, or I mean, just some of the people are not even people I know per se who are like, I want to hear all about your experiences. Like, tell me all about it. And then some of us are people that I know, but who I've never talked to about before, and they've never really expressed any interest or even understanding. And I think that it's legitimate to say like, okay, I'm happy to share with you, but you know, can we talk in a day or two, or can I get back to you in a few days, so that you have time to like pray and meditate on what it is that you want to share that's going to be meaningful, you know, and so that you're not kind of off the cuff just trying to figure out what can I pour out. And for me, I try to think like, what can I share that's gonna like help me to connect with this person, and that's gonna minimize like the potential for further pain or harm down the line. And it's not in a selfish way, like, you know, pain for them and pain for me, you know? So if somebody reaches out to me and it's one of those days where I'm like, man, I don't even feel like being bothered with white people today, like, I'm not gonna share that, you know, because, and it's not so much because I don't want to be open, but if we're not on that level, like that could actually just perpetuate pain and harm, right? And so it's worth kind of thinking through, like, there's a time for everything. There's a time to kind of share every single thing and be it totally real. And there's also a time to refrain, right? And to kind of think really wisely about like, what can I say that is going to be honest and truthful, but that's also going to be wise, right? And that's going to be calibrated to the nature of my relationship with this person. And you want to be able to bring those relationships deeper, but it can't just happen, snap out of the blue just because you got a text, you know? And so I kind of have like levels of things that I'll share about, like, you know, and the stuff that's harder and that's like honestly like the most painful and difficult, I may just not share those things because then I'm in a raw place. And if it goes south, like that creates an opportunity for Satan to work in my heart, you know? And so I just try to be like thoughtful and prayerful and like just wise about what I share and with who. The other thing I'll say is this, like, you know, we want to be open and we want to be kind of like, you know, we want to connect with our brothers and sisters. I think that's really important. But we also can be open in saying like that we don't want to share, or that we're exhausted, or that we're tired. I do feel like there's this thing where it's like, oh my gosh, I want to be a good white person, you know, and let me just text my Black friend and ask them to share like the most painful things they can possibly share with me. And on the one hand, it's like, I'm so appreciative of the desire and the effort to connect. And on the other hand, it's really asking a lot of me, a lot of emotional labor and a lot of time and energy. And you also teach your brothers and sisters something by having boundaries with them, right? So by saying like, man, I appreciate your heart. I love that you want to talk about this. I can't do it right now because it's just too much and there's so much going on and there's so many people who have been reaching out. I can't, but I want to connect and I'm happy to talk at some point, but I just can't do this right now. That's okay too, right? Being a good disciple doesn't mean everyone who asked us to share that kind of thing with them, we are obligated to do it, you know? So definitely applying wisdom there and not feeling an obligation to tear open your heart to every disciple who asks you to, you know?
That's awesome.
Amen. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on now with, next will be Joanne and Ozzy, then Farah, then Tamoy, then Crystal, then Kyle and Alexandra, Ebony, and then David.
And then the sun will come up.
By then it'll be breakfast time. So here we go.
And then I'll order pancakes.
Ozzy.
We're gonna try to be quick. We can give quicker answers.
Oh, you
Yeah,
guys
so
are
we-
doing great.
we're fine.
No, you're doing fantastic. Okay, this is Ozzy and Joanne. Okay, you guys there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you guys so much. This was excellent. Joanne has a question.
Well, yes, I have the question. And I want to start saying, being a Black woman in America, I face more racism inside the church and bias inside the church than outside the church. And anyone who knows me, my character doesn't change whether I'm at work or whether at my children's school, because I do have some cross relationship between the church and the outside world. And the way that I behave, the way that I speak, my directness is pretty much consistent. But I find as a Black woman in the church, whenever I have a concern or bring something up, that what I usually get characterized as being, aggressive, being prideful, being critical, or stirring the pot, causing trouble, or not wanting, or being bitter, the Black bitter women. And I don't get that treatment out in the world, but I get this treatment inside the church. And now that Black Lives Matter is trending, I have to continually pray not to be like Jonah, because Jonah went out to preach, and when the people repented, he was upset and sat under the tree.
Yeah.
So
I amen to that.
Love and pray, but it really wears you down, because I see many sisters in the congregation who are white or who have proximity to white through education, through the way that they speak, or to their color. They're not called prideful. They're called passionate. They're not called troublemakers. They have a concern. So even the language that we use when we're discipling in our relationship with each other can be very, I feel like we don't use biblical terms to sin. I feel like when we say racism, it's like a sanitized version of what's really happening. The sin is favoritism. The sin is arrogance. And I want to hear more preaching on this sin, or also choosing people to lead because they're not as vocal, or they'll be more agreeable with leadership, not having a diverse group of people that represent everyone. So my question is, I'm a Christian and you're a Christian and we're all Christians and we're fighting for our salvation with trembling and fear. And we have the scriptures in our head because I've been a disciple for 25 years, but it does get weary when every turn people that you love and you consider your brothers and sisters in Christ are in turn attacking you in a sense. So how do you keep on going? I know the scriptures, don't give up and not being weary, praying, but it does get exhausted. Like the last 3 weeks has been the most discouraging time in my whole discipleship because through the sermons, through various things, I've been the most discouraged in my whole discipleship because I don't want this trending topic to just be trending and it never being fixed. So I'm basically saying I need all the encouragement in the world and all the prayer in the world because I love our fellowship. I believe we're a family, but I'm faithful in one sense, but so fearful on the other end because I don't know if this situation is going to be thoroughly uprooted or placated.
Yeah. No, I think that's, wow, amen.
Yeah, I think what you've just said kind of echoes Black women in America for like all of history, right? Where they feel like Black women see everything before it goes down. they're paying attention. They don't get any credit for anything they do. They just get labeled as loud and obnoxious. They don't get silenced because they don't get offered leadership positions as easily. So they don't get the pat on the back that says and makes them feel like they've achieved anything. I honestly think our churches and society at large would do ourselves a favor in paying more attention to the voice of Black women, because I mean, just it's historically true time and time and time again. Black women see it, feel it, perceive it before it becomes an issue. And they're usually at the losing end of every decision that is made because they don't have a voice. They're easily squashed down. They're easily labeled or written off as all the things you said, loud, obnoxious, boisterous, angry, chip on your shoulder, bitter. Like that's the label they're given all the while. Most of the time they see the issue clear as day and nobody will listen.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell he just finished reading this book called The Black Women's History of the United States. So just so y'all know,
it was an audiobook. I don't really read books other than the Bible.
Well,
I get it on audio.
I was reading the physical book and he was like, oh, that looks interesting. I'll get the audiobook. And since then he's been like, do you know?
But it's true.
It was a Black woman who figured out the first, like that's been his thing these last couple of weeks. But no, I was going to say, I mean, this really resonates with me. And when I think back over the years, I almost feel like there's a pain there about how much I have contorted myself to try to be what it feels like I need to be like heard and taken seriously. And for people not to say, are you angry? Are you upset? Are you mad at me? It's like, why are you always asking if I'm mad at you? Like, anger is not even a primary emotion for me.
No,
like,
it ain't.
It's very rare that I'm angry, but it's very frequent that people think I'm angry at them. And even when you try to explain, like, that's actually a stereotype. Like, you only think, I'm not yelling, my voice isn't raised, my body language isn't aggressive, I'm talking to you perfectly reasonably. The only reason you think I'm angry is because that's a classic stereotype about Black women. And if I were a white woman, you would not be asking me if I was angry right now. And even when you say that to people, they interpret it as, oh my gosh, you're mad at me for being racist, you know? And it can feel like there's no way out. And so I've honestly contorted myself and have held back and have changed the way I engage people because I'm so tired of having to deal with it, you know? And I try to be as authentic as I possibly can, but I also realize there's a certain level of authenticity that then brings me just more misery because of it. And so I guess I don't have an answer, but I just want to say, like, I feel you.
You're not the only one.
It's totally real. And what I'm hoping is that we get to the point where we can have like some real institutional changes in the church. So not just conversations, which conversations are a part of change. So I don't want to put down the importance of that, but like thinking about even like how we're training people to be disciples, how we're training people to lead, like at the core parts of like how we function, figuring out ways of like really teaching people these things so that they're even thinking about it, you know? And I think if we don't make some of those core changes, it will be like, oh, it'll pass and then it'll move on. I'm hopeful because I think that, you know, like you, I love the Jonah example. And I've really been fighting that hard to be like, oh, now everybody wants to get on the bandwagon after all these years of pain. He's laughing because he knows I have been through all the cycles of this. And but just to have the heart, like, amen, God, like you have decided to wake us up. I just pray that we stay awake, you know? And how can I be a part of that? How can we be a part of that while maintaining the love in our hearts for our brothers and sisters who have been asleep, you know?
Amen. Oh. All right, next we have Farah. Farah, are you there? Okay, go ahead.
Hello,
Farah.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi. Just in case Phil and Leslie didn't ask you, you're perfectly welcome to come to the Brooklyn Ministry and, you know, we'll take you. But my question is this. Well, just to put things into a little bit of context, my first experience with racism was when I was, well, yeah. Well, I guess you wouldn't call it racism. I forgot what's the other word you would call it. But anyway, I was in first grade. Um, I was in class or somewhere in the school. I think it was probably the schoolyard. And some little girl said, "Oh, I don't want to be near you because you have AIDS." I didn't know anything. I didn't understand what it meant. Whatever. I just went home. I told my mother. My mother flipped. She did cartwheels in her head and she came to the school and flipped out. And what had happened is, at the time, the assumption or the word on the street was that AIDS came from Haiti. And being of Haitian descent, that's when there was so much against us. Like, oh, HBO. I've heard of every Haitian joke possible, all the way to high school. And I still know I have peers that they're on medication because of how much we were ridiculed. Like, it messed us up psychologically, I think. So, you know, you get over it. Well, not really get over it, but you move on, you educate yourself, whatever, and you move past and you become a disciple. And wow, the church is so great, the kingdom is so great. And then after a while, they kind of started doing exactly what you said, the sharp thing. Sharp. You've got to be sharp. You've got to invite the sharp. I don't know who we were. There's nothing sharper than the double-edged sword, right? Like, that's the way that it should have been, But the way that I'm realizing now, that the way that I interpreted it, the way that I got hurt by it is, I heard, because of the predisposition, is I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And you know what I mean? Like, I'd already heard that in the world, and then to kind of subliminally get it in the kingdom was kind of hard. And then, so I know, like, for me, it comes out in the fact that, I'll share with anybody, but my faith towards white people, I'm like, are they gonna listen to me? This super religious black girl probably goes to a Baptist church, you know what I mean? Like, so my question is, in light of all that you've shared, all of it is so true. I think all of us can probably think of a story that goes with everything. How do we heal? How do we help ourselves outside of medication? Because I know, like, there's people, I literally know people that took medication. Like, I didn't, thank God. But then I'm thinking about all the people I heard, like, HBO, Haitian body odor, Haitian booty scratcher. Oh, my mother, because culturally, beauty was, especially for kids, you had to put ribbons. Oh my goodness, my mother put ribbons in my hair until like junior high. And I'm like, no, you're making me stand out. Them putting me in ESL classes simply because of my last name. No one spoke to me. All of a sudden, I was just in ESL class. I told my mother came and flipped out like, what are you talking about? This girl was born here. Like, her English is probably better than yours. Like, what do you, like, it's so much. And then when I went to junior high, I had to take the cat in the hat test or whatever before I got into one of the higher end programs, because they had to see if I speak English first. Like, I don't know. But anyway, how do we heal? How do we move forward? Because I feel like the Brooklyn ministry is predominantly, well, let me not say that because I don't know the numbers, but I can pretty much say most of us are Haitian, either Haitian or Haitian descent. So I feel like there's probably so much hurt there. Like, how do we heal? How do we move forward? Yeah. That was a lot, I know.
That's okay.
No, it's awesome. So I'm going to be short because I honestly don't think I'm the best source of wisdom for this particular topic, being the white guy. But what I will say is you know, it's interesting sometimes as disciples, we can be really enthusiastic and feel like studying the depths of the Bible is really important. Its history, the Greek, where did this come from? What was the context of what it was said? What about who wrote this scripture? We will get into that, right? And we will see that as like a really desired characteristic of leaders. And I mean, we love our Bible knowledge and to make sure that we're preaching with the right ideas and the right heart. But here's the thing, we will do that with the Bible, but we will shy away from it from ourselves, right? We won't look at our own self and then those around us with the same desire to connect with God through each other, right? Like J.C. Smith, one of the things I love what he says, sometimes he says, you need to earn a PhD in your kids. You need to be a doctorate of your children, of your wife. And for, you know, where do we go forward? We need to learn to get a PhD in understanding the deepness of who we are as individuals and all the pain, all this hurt, all these things that are sinful, but cannot be simply described as sin, right? Because it's all deep. Like we can just be like, oh, it's all sin. It affects us all. But you would never say that to a rape victim. Like, oh, it's just sin, right? Like these things deeply hurt us. They deeply affect who we are. They are a part of our inner being and the baggage we carry, all of us. So I think a part of how we can heal is really taking on a deep value for understanding who we are and where we come from and all that you just shared, right? Like that's deeply important for anybody that's going to think that they're close to you and think that they're your brother or sister and call you your best friend. That's extremely important for that person to know and to consider with every interaction that they have with you. And we need to be that deep about understanding each other and ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I just want to say, like, man, even as you were sharing all that, it started bringing things up for me, you know? I was thinking about, like, man, I remember that time we went to parent-teacher day. It was like second grade. And the teacher was like asking me to translate for my mom. And I'm like, my parents speak English. Like, I mean, my parents are from the Caribbean, but they speak English.
I gotta laugh because it took me a while to understand.
This happened to him once, actually. Well, I remember one time my uncle.
Her uncle came over and I thought he was speaking. I asked,
and he had no idea what my uncle was saying.
I asked her what language he was speaking. He's speaking English.
It was very early on.
Yeah,
it was like
bad.
Year 1 or 2 of marriage. I was like, this fool thinks. Anyway, but the point is, even as you're talking, all of these memories are coming back up for me. And I actually remember thinking that the Haitian kids had it worse than we did, you know? And my sister-in-law is Haitian, but I remember being in school thinking like, well, at least I'm not Haitian, you know? Not because I had anything against Haitian people, but because like, it just seemed like it was so much worse, you know? And even, you know, among people in the Caribbean, you know, my mom would be like, oh, those Jamaicans, they blah, blah, the Haitians, and you're like, I can hear somebody's accent and I know, oh, you're Jamaican, like, you know, but there's so much stuff there. Like, there's so many layers, you know, the way we're treating each other, even as Black people, the way we're being treated, it's a lot of pain, you know, and I think that pain has to be addressed. It can't just be brushed under the rug. And I want to say, like, I'm a big fan of therapy, which is something that we don't always really acknowledge as important as disciples, that we can't just like read our Bible and study it out and everything will be okay. Sometimes we can, and sometimes we need more than that. We need to really be able to draw these things out and get to the root and like heal, you know? I think even like, you know, being in groups where we can really talk about this, like, look how long we're going tonight, you know? I mean, I'm sure if we had small groups where we could really dig into some of these things and like just talk through and help each other through our pain, so much of the stuff is buried because you have to bury it and move on and keep, or else you're going to drown, right? But then all of these years of burying it, it's like we're drowning in trauma.
And it's all spiritual. And it's never not spiritual. Like
it's always spiritual.
We are physical beings, that we are spiritual beings in a physical body, right? So
and
this stuff all has its proper place in your small groups with the people. Like, we should be talking about this stuff.
And I do think we have resources as disciples in the church. Like, you know, I was talking about that sister Cynthia Langtu, who's a clinical psychologist. I can think of other disciples who are experts, right? And I think we should start thinking about how do we find resources to really like address each other and help each other, both within our bodies that we already have, within our fellowships, within our relationships that we have, by really giving ourselves space to unearth and excavate these things and talk through them, and externally finding other resources that, you know, that we might have in our larger body that could help us to really figure out how to move forward. Because you're right, there's healing is exactly the right word. Like, how do we heal, you know?
You guys are doing amazing. You doing okay?
Still good?
So let me just reiterate for those 104 people still on here. Midweek ended at 8:30. You are absolutely welcome to go to bed. This has been recorded. You can read it tomorrow. No, I've got a message that I need to wrap this up. But I think that you know, I just want you to know it's okay if you got to go. There's no judgment here at all. You stayed your. But obviously you're helping tremendously. So we actually, you know what, let's do this. We got 4 more questions. Yeah, we got 4 more questions. Let's do those, and then we'll just call it a night at that point, because Paul did preach till midnight, so that is biblical, and we may make it there. Leslie was just asking if you could.
You said, well, Uber Eats pancakes.
Good girl.
Yeah.
What's some good ones? You got good ones up there, and the bacon and the sausage.
Can you, just a reminder though, you'll be able to send us those resources, and do you have any specific therapist or people you might recommend? Just some other things you might be, you don't have to answer that now, but maybe you can send us stuff.
Because also is just because with the therapy and stuff too, do you know people on Disciples Today, if they're focusing specifically this topic, like to help people?
I didn't know that.
No, I'm wondering if you know. I don't know.
I can think of 1 or 2 people.
Okay.
But I don't know who I think would be great. I just don't know if they're looped in the sense that anyone would be able to identify them as, like, you know, being able to help.
Specific with this topic, yeah.
And to deal with the nuts and bolts of getting that information, instead of I almost said us, but it ain't going to be me involved. Jamila, instead of Jamila fielding a bunch of random emails and different requests, Phil, if you could collect those, sure. Then we could streamline that communication chain so Jamila can provide one swift resource.
We can put it on our thing. We can put it on our bulletin and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's keep going here. We got 4 more questions. All right. Here we go. We just lost Taiwo. Good night, Taiwo.
Sleep well.
Good night, Taiwo.
Tamoy and Janine. I'm going to unmute you. Tamoy, are you still there?
Yes, it's Janine.
Janine. Okay, gotcha. Go ahead, Janine.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you, Justin and Jamila, for just being open and sharing. My question just talks about relationships and how to do that. I guess a little bit about me. I grew up, I'm a Black American, so my parents are from America, the United States, particularly the South. My father was a part of the Black Panthers movement, and I feel like, well, I know it to be true, a lot of our upbringing was kind of like we saw white people as people that were against us, and I guess this is just, me confessing how I was brought up. We saw as white people that was against us. We were taught to, don't look to the white people to better your community yourselves, each one teach one. We had that kind of mentality. And I feel like for me, it kind of like altered the way I viewed white people as like, I would kind of like see them as, in a sense, I don't know if you're a racist or not, so I don't want to initiate a friendship or anything with you until you can prove to me that you're not that person. So, and I feel like, now I'm a disciple, I'm a part of, the body of Christ, but I feel like there are some times where I feel like I hesitate in initiating friendships or like relationships with, white people, because even though we are disciples, we are a part of this world and we all had different upbringing. So I'm afraid of like, what happens initiate a friendship with someone who's white and they have like, stereotypes about me and stuff like that. So I shy away from those relationships. And so my question is basically, how can I, with my upbringing and like the things that I was taught, like start to initiate relationships with white people without that fear?
Yeah.
That's an awesome question.
Yeah.
You have anything? Or you want me to...
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Really quick. I guess I would say embrace that fear and like allow yourself to like, one of the things I do, I mean, we live in a predominantly white community, and just all throughout, especially like my educational journey, I've spent a lot of time like in environments where I'm like the only Black person around, And so God has almost forced me, like, you're either going to be willing to initiate friendships with white people or you're not going to have any friends, right? Like, where it's like, I haven't had any choice. But one of the things that I've learned to do is embrace the possibility, which is a possibility, that I'm going to be hurt, that people are going to have stereotypes about me, that they're going to have the wrong idea about me, that they're going to bring their baggage into that relationship, just like I have my own, but it's different. I don't like false equivalency, so I want to make it seem like it's the same thing, because it's not. But I almost calibrate so that I expect that, and then pray for God to give me a heart of patience and compassion so that I can try to love people regardless. Now, of course, there are boundaries at some point, like, and I've been in these relationships where it's like, well, at some point, this is just painful. And I'm trying to learn and grow and embrace and be compassionate, and this other person is not doing the same. And so, don't be in toxic relationships just because you're like, well, I want to try to love Jesus, so I got to just keep accepting this mistreatment. Not that, right? But almost like expect a certain level of that so it doesn't hold, the fear of it doesn't hold sway over you anymore. You know what I mean? Like, our relationship is a perfect example. Like, there were definitely times, especially early in our marriage, where Justin's cluelessness was very hurtful. But working through that and loving him through that, like, I've gotten so much more than I would have gotten by avoiding that pain. And even recently, I think it was like just a few years ago when it was like Freddie Gray and that whole time. And I just remember I was teaching a class and I was teaching about police violence, and it was really intense. And I was just going through this phase where I was like coming home every day talking about it. And at one point he was like, man, do we have to talk about this all the time? And that really hurt me. I was like, man, I guess you just have the privilege of shutting it off when you feel like shutting it off. I do have to think about it all the time. You clearly don't. And I was really hurt, And we had to kind of talk through that. We had to figure it out. He figured it out. He would never say something like that now, But I just think, like, you are probably going to be hurt in those relationships. And I think, like, accepting that so that fear of that pain doesn't control you anymore, and then praying for God to give you the strength to love through that pain.
Yeah, I'll throw in my 2 cents here. So first off, I love the wisdom in your question.
Yeah.
Very, very wise question, very honest, heart level question. But so the way I don't know, like, there's a part of me that wants to tell you don't owe white people anything. But we're talking about now in the church, right? We're talking about like your spiritual brothers and sisters and the love that bonds us together. So I can't just tell you don't owe white people anything, and you need to talk to nobody, because at the end of the day, I would guess that probably a lot of white people are thinking exactly what you're thinking they're thinking, right? Like, I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is, I think sometimes you can feel like it's your job because you know that racism exists, right? Like, you don't have the privilege of pretending that it doesn't exist. So you know that racism it can exist. You are aware of yourself, it sounds like, very much so. So there could be an inclination to fight against that and go out of your way purposively to try to forge relationships that aren't of God's prompting with white people just because they're, your brother or sister in Christ, right? Like, we are called to love each other, empathize with each other, carry each other's burdens, and all these other one another scriptures. But that doesn't mean we're all going to feel like we can be friends, like we're going to connect with one another, right? And just because I feel like I don't connect with you on a friend level, doesn't mean that gives me the right not to care about you as my brother or sister. So for you, I think yes, if you're going to go out of your way to seek friendships with, genuine friendships with white brothers and sisters, right? You are going to expose yourself to potential pain because people are lacking understanding. They're going to say dumb things. You're going to have to figure out, well, when is this relationship too much of a burden for me to carry? I got a ditch now because I don't mind getting a little muddy with somebody, but I ain't going to step into the swamp, So for you, if it were me, okay, I would give myself the advice, let God lead me to the most beneficial relationships that are going to be mutually beneficial, right? I wouldn't ever tell any Black person ever that they should invite more pain upon themselves just because they are aware of racism and feel like they have a need to build a white friendship. I would caution you against that. If you feel like that's not where you're at. We all have different tolerance levels for this. Some people are better at handling emotional pain than others. I think you also have to know yourself. Are you spiritually mature enough in that area where you can, handle some pain to get to a point where you can build that deep relationship? Like I would say first examine yourself. What can you handle? Where's your spiritual maturity? But if you cannot, if you don't feel like you're capable of doing that, then I don't think if God's a father, I don't think he would push his child to do something out of obligation, out of just if your heart is not ready for that, I wouldn't say, I would never tell a Black person, make sure you go and diversify your friend group with white people because you're aware of race.
But if your heart is ready for it, amen.
Yeah.
Amen. You guys are amazing. Thank you. Next we have Crystal. And Crystal, are you still there? Crystal? Okay, good. All right, go ahead, Crystal.
So, I don't even know if I have a question, but I wanted to just share because my parents are similar to you guys. My dad is Italian, and my mother is Black and Puerto Rican. And my dad was never around when I was a kid. And so my mom is dark skinned. And so my mom would always try to bring me to see my family, my dad's family, for me to stay connected. And there was where, I got my first experience with racism. I had an uncle who used to say to my mom, why you keep bringing these Black kids here to my house, say things about my features, just a lot of different things. And I don't know how my mom did it. I don't know how she tried to maintain those relationships for me. And so all my life, I feel like I've always identified myself as a Black woman. But of course, people look at me and they're like, oh, well, she can't just be Black. There's something else, Yes, my mom's mother was Puerto Rican and my mom's dad was Black from the South. So yes, I have Puerto Rican heritage in me, but I don't speak Spanish. I grew up basically just in a Black, with my Black mom And, you know, my aunt, who also was also is a Black woman. And so, you know, for me, it's always been hard because I feel like I've never been able to identify myself. Like, it's always been what people call me. Well,
Yeah.
she's this or she's that, you know. And so when you shared about your children, it's just something I relate to. I remember sometimes, you know, when I was a kid, trying to wash my skin to see if it will reveal, you know, the brown color my mom was, or, you know, I just felt like there's something wrong with me. And it wasn't until really I became a disciple that I started to feel like I had an identity.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, I finally found my identity in Christ. And it's something that I'm still working through. Like, even I have relationships with my Italian family, my cousins, but it's hard. I don't feel always comfortable when I'm with them. And I know they love me, you know, but it's really hard. And so, I don't know, I'm just sharing to say that, you know, I've dealt with just a lot in terms of just identity and just trying to find my place. But like I said, I just consider myself a Black woman because that's how I was raised and taught. But you know, people always see me as, well, she's this, she's not, you know, and so it's hard, you know.
Yeah. Man, thank you for sharing that, Crystal. That's hard stuff for sure. And I so appreciate your honesty and your heart, and you know, with our kids, like my oldest is 10, and I would say right around the time he was 5, he decided, like, I'm Black, and he just started referring to himself that way, and he just he feels very strongly about it, you know. And it's like, that's who you are, you know, that's who you understand yourself to be, that's who you are. Now, if he were to be like, I'm white, we might have a conversation, because nobody is going to look at him and think that. And so you can't be living in a bubble where, but I think for you, like, that's a part of your identity, and you're allowed to say that, you know, and to not have people sort of question who you are. But it does get really complicated, you know. And our younger son, he feels much more comfortable. He describes himself as like both, you know. He'll say, I'm biracial, and that's just where he feels more comfortable. And that's okay too. Like, we're not going to be like, no, you Black, you know what I mean? Like, and I think sometimes we're just so eager to like tell each other who we are, you know, and dictate people's identities to them. And it's just painful. And I'm sorry that you've had to go through that, but I'm so grateful that you were able to find Jesus, you know, and to have that identity that, you know, just helps us to figure out all the rest of the identities.
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly why this is such an important thing for the church to do better in, for us to eventually get right and grow in, because people of all skin tones and racial backgrounds and different countries of origin go through enough outside of the church with the way you're brought up and the family relations and different issues and what you're told, the narrative you're given about, you know, how acceptable your features are or undesirable or not pretty or look favorably upon or not. Like, people of color go through enough of this outside of the church that we absolutely cannot afford not to address it for what it is and acknowledge it and learn about it and think deeply about it inside the church, because otherwise the church is not going to be the protective, loving environment it can be if we just accidentally keep perpetuating these things within the church. Like, there's enough pain in the world that we don't need to be reproducing it in God's kingdom.
I almost wish we could bring Brooklyn to everyone, because y'all just reveal there's so much complexity here, you know, and there are so many different sources of pain. And it even goes beyond just the Black-white divide. It's many more layers than that many people in our fellowship just can't even begin to comprehend. And I just think there's just so much that Brooklyn could teach everybody, honestly.
Amen. Thank you guys, and thank you, Crystal, for sharing.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna do 2 more questions, and then we're gonna start to close down here. We have Ebony and then David Allen. So Ebony, are you there? Can you hear me? Oh, sorry, I just muted you. Oh, I'm trying to unmute you. Okay, you there, Ebony?
Yes, hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Good job. Yeah, Ebony.
First, I want to say you guys are phenomenal. Like, we could talk all night. This is something that I think not only Brooklyn needed, but the church in general needs, to sit down and have sort of like a town meeting of real, raw, authentic conversations where we can just express how we've been feeling, the things that we've been attacked with, thinking of words that I want to say, but it's just something that we've needed. And I think for a lot of us, we didn't really know we needed it. Yeah. Because as you said, that continue bury, because as a Black woman, something I always taught my daughters, and I was listening to another sister say it, and I was like, wow, I didn't know everybody had this exact same conversation. I would tell my daughters all the time, you have 2 strikes against you. You're Black and you're female. Like, this is the conversations that I had, and I didn't know that all Black mothers were telling their daughters this same thing, and how sad that is that I have to tell my daughter that instead of these things being assets, they're strikes. So amen to that. Okay, so the question that I had was concerning our materials, because when we talk about racism, we see it coming in different forms, and especially with implicit bias, but some things I think are not so implicit. Yeah. So when we talk about the Kids Kingdom materials, right, every week we're using these things, and we all have our Bibles, and we all know what it says in the Bibles about the scriptures. And for some people, let me preface this, some people may think this is like a small, minute thing, but coming from a teacher background, I know that I'm very deliberate in what I teach. Yep. There's deliberation in the materials that I use, the words that I use, the visuals that I use. It's very deliberate, right? So that being said, when I look at the materials that we use for the Kids Kingdom, there to me is a deliberate, purposeful action to teach our children something other than visually what is not in the Bible. And I think that's important, because if we can't even get that authentic, if we can't even get that right, what is that saying? And why is it so important? Because for some people, they're like, well, it's just a picture. But it's not just a picture. That picture paints a narrative, right? So when we talk about the Middle Eastern people that we see in those publications, and they all, Jesus walking around with brown hair, blue eyes, looking white, what is that saying to our children? Yep. And it's not even coming from me, because I'm not saying that, oh, he should be a Black person. I'm saying that what the Bible, which is our standard, if the Bible is saying this is what he was, why are we showing something opposite than what he was? And I wanted to know how you guys felt about it, and do you feel it is deliberate?
Yeah, you know what's funny? We actually, we're the Kingdom Kids leaders, coordinators in Syracuse. And I will tell you, I stopped using that curriculum a long time ago. And this is one part of it. And even more, I will go even more broadly than that. Like, you know, you have the kind of like the pictures and the images, but even in the actual materials, you know, there's a kind of like a skirting around, and, you know, so the same way that we haven't really been addressing it like with the adult disciples in the church, it doesn't really get taught. Like, we're not really teaching our children to be able to be equipped to think about this, to talk about this, to enter into like their generation really being different, and not being different just because they're taught, let's all just love each other and get along, but having a full understanding of these things. And Justin knows this, I literally make up my own Kids Kingdom lessons. And we will give the teachers lessons and materials like, you know, the other teachers who teach, but we also encourage them to like draw on their own knowledge and their own experiences and their own backgrounds to structure a class that's going to teach the kids something real and authentic. You know, I have no idea if it's deliberate. I don't know. Like I always tell my students, I don't know what is in anybody's heart and mind, but I know you don't even need to have anything deliberate in your heart and mind to be able to do harm, you know? And so I think it really is just a kind of ethnocentrism, like your own perspective, your own experiences, your own images in your mind get played out through those materials. And it's a matter of who is creating the materials. And so I think there's room to grow there, honestly. And in a lot of different ways. I know, well, you've been a big proponent of who's up on the slides, whose pictures are, you know?
I think, you know, we kind of take the model of the traditional American school system into kids' kingdom sometimes, right? Which is highly problematic. I think last year, you know, around Christmas time, my youngest came home and told me all about Black Peter because they're learning about the different ways Christmas is celebrated, you know, in different countries. And he told me that Black Peter is one of the helpers of Santa that punishes the bad kids and whips them. And I never heard of Black Peter. I started looking into it. I come to figure out this was a myth, you know, Santa Claus myth, but it's because in that country, Santa had little black slaves, and they were the ones that did the bidding of Santa. And, you know, in the teacher's mind, she's thinking, oh, I'm teaching different cultural traditions about, you know, how Christmas is celebrated. In my mind, I'm thinking you just taught my brown kid that these little enslaved elves are go and do the evil work of when Santa wants to punish the bad kids, right?
And he didn't like it. He was upset about it.
You know, I wrote the teacher a whole email and all this stuff. And the thing is, that's something that from a white perspective that's figuring out curriculum, you think you're doing a service and be like, oh, well, we're teaching about like different cultures and different beliefs. But what the failing of understanding is that cultural belief or that set curriculum came from a faulty set of narratives and a wrong way of thinking that is really old, that isn't just what is trending, right? You know, it's interesting even, you know, I think about, you know, white Jesus, black Jesus, sticking with Christmas, you think about white Santa, black. I always tell my kids, no, there's no black Santa, because any black man sliding down somebody's chimney, they would have been arrested in 2 seconds. Black Santa was not a thing, especially in the United States, because he would have been done arrested, breaking in someone's house, giving gifts. But anyway, so I think the thing that can happen, I don't know if with curriculum, especially with Kids Kingdom, that is intentional in that moment, right? But I do think we've adopted these ways that, you know, we look at the outside world and we're like, why should the church have to think about teaching all over again and reinvent the wheel? We can just take these teaching principles that we know from our school systems, our public school systems, our private school system, and we'll just adopt that same curriculum base and make it spiritual and make it biblical. But we don't realize that we've also grafted in this wrong cultural dynamic and some of this racism in with it. So I do think at some point that's absolutely worth looking at. And sometimes we do have to go back to the drawing board and say, wait, why do we teach this? Where did we get this idea from? Where did we get this curriculum from?
And I'll say this really quickly. At the end of the day, any area where we're not at least trying to think explicitly about racism, we're probably perpetuating it. Because in a system like the system that we're embedded in this country, and the norms and the ideas and the stereotypes and explicit, implicit, the whole range, it just really infuses so much of what is around us and often in us, that if we're not very straightforwardly and intentionally trying to engage and forfend against it, then it will happen irrespective of our intentions. Like either we're thinking about it or we're perpetuating it. But the option of like innocent ignorance that that causes no harm, that's benign, it's just not really an option.
And I'll this is not to your question,
He
but
likes to have the last word, can you tell?
to what she just said, it's really important. That is exactly what will drive white leadership away. And that's just honest. That's what's going to drive white people away. To feel like, man, I got to think about race with everything. Yes, white people do have to think about race with everything. Because let's be honest, that's what our brothers and sisters of color do day in and day out from the time they get up to the time they go to sleep. Why is that fair? It's not. So the only way to eventually, in some amount of time, hit a place of equality, even in our fellowship, white people need to start thinking about race constantly.
Amen. Come on, bro. There's a call in the chat for you guys to move to Brooklyn. So you can either move. Yeah, it's not that far of a
Are you in
commute,
Ithaca?
right?
Are you in Ithaca?
Yeah.
All right, we've got.
Like that.
We have those waterfalls, man. Those are awesome.
So we're going to close out with one more question. It's appropriate we end with David Allen because we began with David Allen video at the very beginning. So how about that? David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, first of all, thank you guys so much for hanging in there and for answering all those questions. And the question I have is about a practice we have in the church. That's something that bothers me, and I wanted what you thought about it, especially as a social scientist. Often when we think about racism and changing racism, a lot of times our default is we're going to pray about it, which is powerful, and we need to do that. Yeah. But also that kind of quickly followed up that with this idea that we don't fight with the weapons of the world, and a kind of demeaning of social protests.
Yeah.
That it's not something that is valuable. And the thing that bothers me about it is that we benefit from it. We benefit from the social movements that have gone on through the years. We benefit from people being abolitionists. We benefit from people fighting against Jim Crow. We benefit from people fighting during the civil rights movement. And there have been times in the church when we've celebrated other types of rebellion or revolution. We celebrate the American Revolution, for example, right? And we don't demean that. So I think that's something that we need to look at. That is, I don't, like Patty C, I don't think that everybody needs to go out and protest. I think that we all have all different ways of resisting.
Yeah.
But I do think we have to look at how we speak about those people who do go out and resist and fight. You know, I think of Cyrus in the Bible, that God calls him, the Bible calls him a servant of God, because he freed the Jews from the Babylonian oppression and set them free, right? And I think that we have to re-examine how we talk about protest movements. Obviously, there is a way to go out and protest that's sinful, right? Yeah. And we need to not do that. But at the same time, I think we have to re-examine how we talk about that, and maybe with a little bit more gratitude for the freedoms that we have because of those who do go out and protest on our behalf.
Yeah, wow. That's a great question, but also embedded in your question is so much wisdom, right? And I think that's right. I think in general, I think we have to be careful with the way that we use the scripture as disciples. And sometimes if, there's something we just don't like, it's really easy, especially you're around for long enough, you know your Bible well enough. People find a scripture that makes it seem like it's not okay to do that thing that makes you feel kind of uncomfortable. Like, protesting, that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Oh, we don't fight with the weapons of the world. And it's like, well, actually, like that scripture has a particular context, right?
The Bible was used to keep slaves in their place, right? Yeah. So we have to really think about how we use the scriptures when we're talking about when we're talking about, how we stand up to injustice, right? Because historically, this country has done very poorly with using the scriptures to actually, we've done very good using the scriptures to keep people in their place or oppress people. So back to your point.
No, exactly. I mean, I think anytime, that's not to say that the scripture shouldn't be a central part of what shapes our thinking about everything, no matter what the issue is. But I think we have to be very careful when the inclination is to sort of like pluck a scripture and use it to say, oh, no, we shouldn't be doing that. And, one of the things people have asked me a lot this question about protests. And one of the things, I've just been saying, like, have we really studied this out deeply? Do we have a kind of deep well of knowledge, spiritual knowledge to draw from around this issue? Now, protest is actually a relatively recent historical phenomenon. So there was no equivalent to protest as we think about it now, really, during the time that the Bible was written. There were certainly various forms of resistance, right? And Moses marching into Egypt and marching out with all Pharaoh's enslaved peoples, I mean, he was resisting the political order, the political powers that be. He was resisting the status quo, right? Joseph, I mean, there are actually a lot of historical figures in the Bible that in many ways were resisting the political status quo, and they were doing it in ways that were very transgressive, right? And that were very much like, not just, follow all the rules and laws and do everything that, that the authorities tell you to do. And so I think that there's a lot of digging for us to do in the scriptures to figure out, what does God teach us about the appropriate ways to pursue justice? Because we know God cares about justice. We know he's a God of justice. And we know that he feels the pain of people who are in pain, and that he calls us to bring like his love and his mercy and his justice into the world in the ways that we can. And so just writing off protests as, oh, that's not how we do things, we just need to pray, it's very superficial. It really lacks a depth of thinking that we need in order to figure out our place in this world. And frankly, I think at times it hinders us from being able to reach out to people who are passionate about these things. There are people who I've invited to church who are like, well, what is your church doing about ABCD issue? And it's like, well, nothing. We don't really engage issues. We're not political. And there are a lot of people that are like, well, that's deeply immoral. It's not moral to be neutral in the face of injustice, right? And if that's what your church is about, then now sometimes that thinking can be wrong. So I'm not saying we should wholesale go in that direction. But I think that there are a lot of opportunities that we miss to be a light in the world by writing off various forms of resistance, including protests, as unspiritual. And I hope that this is a moment where we can grow in that way. And what you say about us benefiting from it is so true. The social science research actually supports protest as being a precursor for major transformative policy change. And there's a lot of social science research that suggests a lot of the kind of moves towards equality that we see post-1960s, post-civil rights movement, those things simply wouldn't happen without the civil rights movement. And even in the last several years since Black Lives Matters, we've seen policy changes that we can direct and we can link empirically to Black Lives Matters. So it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything Black Lives Matters does. It doesn't mean you have to be like, I'm gonna burn everything down. I mean, sometimes I feel that way, but then I pray about it. I'm gonna burn everything down. We can be righteous, we can be godly, we can be centered in Christ, and we can still take a stand against injustice. And the fact that we've been made to feel like those things are opposites is really misguided, I think. And it's one place where we have to reflect and dig a lot more deeply.
Should I follow tradition and take the last word here?
He can have the last word.
So two simple points to be made is, one, protesting is following the law. That's something we have a right to do as American citizens, just as much as the Second Amendment, right? So, which is an interesting, not to get too political, but it's an interesting thing where it's like, should we protest, even though that's what the First Amendment says we should absolutely do when we feel injustice. Number two, kind of to go along with that, is the idea of social justice. Recently, the Gospel Coalition, I get their Facebook thing every now and then, they did a dig biblically into is there a Bible stance on social justice? And when you look back into the Hebrew and the text of especially the Old Testament, you find that there absolutely is a place for social justice, except under the way the word justice is used, it's used in two different contexts. One, like eye for eye justice, but then the other places it's used in the Old Testament, the only way we can describe the way that they used that word back then is with what we call social justice. So social justice and standing up for equality and the rights of those around us and within our fellowship is a completely biblical thing that falls right in line with God's heart. And so not only are we supposed to be the royal priesthood that affects the world around us with intentionality, right, and pursues social justice. So not only is that our spiritual mandate and something we're tasked with, but it's also something within the law that we are granted the ability to do as citizens of this country. That's my take on protesting. So
Awesome. Wow. You guys have given us so much of your heart, so much of your minds. You've given us 3 hours of your time. And we are incredibly grateful for this. So I do want to say thank you to you. I also want to say thank you to Brooklyn, generally to everybody, for your honesty, your forthright questions, your humility to be honest, all of it. I know we've lost some of our people. They'll probably hear this tomorrow on the recording, and that's okay. But I just want to say thank you to Brooklyn as well. And Justin, Jamila, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for coming here, or for joining us. You didn't. Thank you for sitting in your house. Seriously, thank you so much. We like to give our guest speakers a Junior's cheesecake as a gift, but we obviously can't. But we owe you a couple Junior's cheesecake.
I was gonna say we'll take a rain check.
Yeah,
when we come up, we'll bring it.
We owe you. Just to remind you guys too that Jamila is very sought after. I know you're doing a lot. You're very busy speaking a lot. Justin, I'm sure you're sought after in some circle, some realm. But Jamila is definitely, and so we just are very fortunate to have both of you here tonight. And again, I just want to say thank you so much for this. I think
yeah, you guys are amazing.
Thank you. I
was
mean,
definitely encouraged by you.
Good, thank you. I'm glad the encouragement was mutual. And obviously you are hitting on some very deep roots here that and we could keep talking. But just a reminder. So we said you're going to send me some resources. Is that what we said? Okay. So you'll send them to me, and then I can disperse them to all of Brooklyn, and then we can make sure that everybody gets them. You can always go to Jamila's website, right, which is jamilamishner.net. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And
we'll put that
you
up
see
there.
the book she's written, what she's done, yeah. So guys, thank you again so much. You both are you're an amazing team, and what you've given to us has helped tremendously. I can I'm reading in the chat as well. I think people might be moving to up there. So
Yeah, tell them what houses cost up there.
oh yeah, if you tell them the price of a house, I think people will be moving to Ithaca.
Come on down. Yeah, you all talking about us going there. Come on
That's
down.
right, man.
I know, right? Cost of living is way better up there.
Is
Cornell open?
Not right now. No.
Are you doing classes online? Is that what you're doing?
Yep.
Yeah.
I actually am working more. Spending more time working now than I was when.
Yeah.
I know, right? Sorry.
How about you, Justin? Are you
Are you online, Justin?
Are you working or?
I mean, so the preschool that I work at is during regular school year is now. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that got shut down a while ago. But my little business that I've been building is thriving. So I hide down in the basement and make stuff all day long.
Oh, good for you.
Nice.
Good for you, man. Well, let me close out with a prayer. Justin, would you mind leading us in a prayer? And then I will unmute the chat. You can stay on as long as you want, everyone. And of course, you guys, Justin, Jamila, you can stay as long as you want or as little as you want. I'm not sure your kid situation at this point, but
I'm so
why don't
happy
you?
right now.
Oh, good. Just if you have any chocolate, that always helps, like cake or
Yeah,
something
before bed.
at 11. Justin, so why don't you close out in prayer, and then we'll unmute this all, and we will enjoy some fellowship.
Absolutely. God, Father, just thank you for tonight, God. There's such vulnerability, God, and I know there's things that have only been whispered in prayers that only you've heard some things before tonight that have been now spoken out loud, God. I am so honored to be a part of your kingdom, God, where we can strive and fight to be different from the world, God, to truly be holy, to be set apart and called out, to be different. God, help us to continually to interrogate our inner selves, God, and examine our motives and to right wrongs when we see them. Help us to understand your heart and your character about justice and social justice, and help us to be thinkers and learners. Should we shy away from things that have been classically labeled as politics, God, because we're too afraid of what we might find? God, help us to grow, God. We so want to be unified with each other, God, so we can bring glory to you, God. Help us to embrace one another's pain, God, to carry one another's burden, to be more empathetic, God, than we have ever dared before. God, help us to be bold and brave and also measured at the same time. God, now is a time where we can glorify you, God, with not just how many conversions we can make in a year, but how much we can grow together and be more bonded than ever and more unified and more impacting on a much deeper level, God, than ever before. Father, thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you for Brooklyn. Gosh, they've hung in there for this whole entire time. Also, listening to the brilliance of Jamila and me muddling through a sentence here and there, God. I'm just so grateful for their hearts and their patience and just all of their questions and comments and being open, God. This is only something we can experience in the kingdom, which is so valuable and so needed, and we're extremely grateful for it, God. Thank you, and it's in your Son Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.